Roll the dice gently, Brandon, picking up less snow, now squeezing it out. So squeezing it out harder. Barbara Jones walked leisurely through the winter park and smiled as she watched the scene. A guy in his early 20s was teaching twin boys how to mold snowballs. "Dad, it's not working with Ashley," one of the boys said. "Wow, so young and already a father." The woman remarked to herself, "My Michael is already over 40 and still does not give grandchildren." I'm wasting my retirement time, you might say. It was about 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and at such a time and season this usually busy place was practically deserted. Only moms with strollers and retired women like Barbara Jones strolled by. She had been retired for 4 years. In her time, she had been a wonderful, decent doctor, and now she was returning from a colleague who worked in a private clinic. She removed a small amount of tartar from her teeth, examined her gums, and checked for cavities. The condition of the oral cavity is good. Barbara Jones thought in medical terms as she walked toward home. Good thing the old filling's intact. I'll buy myself some peeled seeds and have a little nibble. Squirrel, ma'am. The old park was full of animals and birds, which was surprising since it was in the center of the city. Squirrels jumped through the trees, and in summer the voices of thrushes, starlings, and tits came from behind the branches, and there were even rare hares. Along the paths, gloomy crows wandered and pigeons scurried about, and hedgehogs rustled into the bushes. On the river running through the park lived a family of swift ducks and majestic swans. How Michael loved to crumble bread for them, the woman recalled. In those days, it was not yet known that it was not advisable to give bread to birds. It was the children's favorite pastime. Now it's the cold season. Waterfowl huddled closer to the embankment where there were descents to the water in the hope that there would be those willing to feed them. And there was one. A young girl stood at the edge of the granite steps, entering the water and threw some treats to the birds. "Cunning ducks," Barbara Jones remarked. "If they had elbows, they'd be pushing the swans around to snatch a piece faster." She smiled again, and at that moment the girl, throwing another portion, suddenly staggered and fell into the icy water. Barbara Jones froze with horror for a second. Her strength would obviously not be enough to help the girl out. Nevertheless, she hurried toward the steps. She saw the boy who was playing with the twins running that way as well. "Hang on, little girl, coming your way." After him. The girl was literally a meter from the shore. She tried to scramble out, but the flimsy ice she was leaning on was breaking and her feet were apparently sliding along the bottom. "Hold on, I'll get you," shouted the lad, running up to the scene first. Just as suddenly he realized there was nothing nearby for the girl to reach out to grasp, no fallen branch, no break in any rope. Central Park was always well cleaned. The guy resolutely took off his down jacket, took it by the sleeve, and threw the other end toward the girl. She tried to cling to the wet fabric, but her hand slipped. "I've got a stick," Barbara Jones shouted. She did not immediately remember her folding cane, for it was habitually in her bag. Barbara Jones didn't limp, but as she grew older, she began to feel dizzy when she felt like she was going to fall. It was at times like these that she reached for the stick. "And immediately I feel like there's some support. And I'm not going to collapse," she told her son. "It's more of a psychological technique. You understand, don't you?" Michael replied. "Yeah, that's why I carry it around with me, usually in my bag. I just know it's there for me." The woman smiled. "And if anything, she'll support me physically. And so psychologically I feel better." Now she quickly pulled a cane out of her bag, unfolded it, and held it out to the young man. He grabbed the stick and held it out to the girl. And finally, the latter was able to get a good grip on it. The guy, straining, pulled her to the steps and helped her up. "Thank you," said the trembling girl. And at that moment, Barbara Jones noticed that a mitten, a good quality one, part woolen, part leather, was floating in the hollow that had formed. The girl was wearing the other one, which was probably why she could not get a good grip on the fabric of the down jacket. And in an emergency, she didn't have time to take it off. The mitten was starting to get swept away by the current towards the middle of the river. "Give me my stick," said the woman to the guy. Taking it, she took aim and with her most frightened gait poked the end of her cane into the mitten. She picked it up like a fisherman and threw it on the shore. She looked at the young men, then at her, then at each other. Suddenly they all burst into loud laughter. "We're stress relievers. As a former doctor, I'm telling you, it's good for you," Barbara Jones said. Extraordinary circumstances. Fear, Favorable resolution of the situation. Release of the body, she explained the chain of reactions. Well, you gave us a scare, the boy turned to the girl. Why so close to the horse, he said in a paternal tone, which looked funny in relation to a girl almost the same age as her. I was feeding the birds. Sounds silly, yes, shrugged her shoulders and smiled. The wolves are fed, and the sheep are safe. Suddenly there was a giggle. Early. Or rather, the birds are fed, and I'm a sheep, by the looks of it, and I'm wet. I'm sorry, I'm just scared. I must be talking nonsense. All right, darling. Where do you live? Barbara Jones asked. You're going to freeze in your wet clothes. Do you need a change of clothes? Oh, I'm far away in the suburbs, in a bedroom community. I'm in the neighborhood. I'm in college here, walking around looking for adventure, the woman paraphrased. No, really? It's just that today I didn't have a class to go to, and it's pointless to drive home. All the time it takes to get there and back. So I thought I'd go to the park, take a walk, get some fresh air, and I always have birdseed with me. Hey, why don't you come to my house? Barbara Jones suggested it. I live near here. If you go back to the Institute, there's not much help there. It's a long way from home. You said it yourself. I'll give you a change of clothes and we'll have a cup of tea. You can sit down to dry off. Picking up a client, the girl giggled again. Is it good that you know classic movies? Smiled the woman. But let's still get moving before you get completely cold. The girl nodded and walked. Barbara Jones didn't have far to go. After about 5 minutes, they climbed the stairs in the alley of ancient oaks, came out into a cozy alley, and found themselves near a 5-story house of the Stalin era with large windows and spacious loggias. What's your name, girl? The woman asked, putting the magnetic key to the intercom. Amber, I think we're in a fairy tale. Barbara Jones smiled as she stepped into the entryway. Yes, this is a fairy tale, Amber wondered to herself. She looked around the ground floor hallway, the size of a studio apartment. Barbara Jones went to the elevator and pressed the call button. The doors opened and they stepped inside. Do you have an elevator here? In a 5-story building? The girl wondered aloud. Yes. Do you know what our neighbors call our house on the block? Barsky? They say that aristocrats really live here. Not exactly aristocrats, but several mayors and famous athletes lived here in the Soviet era. I see, not ordinary people, so to speak, the girl said. That's why there is an elevator, and the layout is so spacious. I have not been inside the apartment before. The ceilings are somewhere at the level of heaven, and you can live in the hallway as in a separate room. They got to the 4th floor, entered the apartment, and Amber really involuntarily aghast. So it was not like the usual house, just a palace. She said enthusiastically, "Come in and make yourself royal, but I'll feed you plain." Barbara Jones smiled. "Do you eat oatmeal?" "I eat everything," Amber said. "Good for you. I still like simple food, though I can afford delicacies now," the woman said thoughtfully. "Go to the bathroom. I'll get you some towels and clothes to change into, and we'll put yours in the wash at once." Half an hour later, they were drinking tea in the kitchen, which would fit the usual nightstands, cupboards, and a whole upholstered set. A sofa with 2 armchairs. Amber was curled up on one of them, wearing a Barbara Jones robe. She was embarrassed to ask where the older woman got such an income. She was silent about it, too. "What are you studying, Amber?" "Marketing manager," she answered proudly. She twirled her dark, still dry curls on her finger. Her blue eyes sparkled. "What are you going to do later?" "Increase the profits of the company I'll be working for." Amber smiled briefly. Barbara Jones noted, "You could just say, I'll be looking for advertisers to sell more products, researching demand and making recommendations. That kind of thing. My son could use such an expert." "Oh, that's an interesting challenge," Amber said. "There are a lot of products like that on the market right now. It's hard to figure out how to stand out. This matters more than just price to gain, but..." She began, but Barbara Jones interrupted her with a smile. Wait a minute. Here he's about to come himself, and we'll tell you." Amber was embarrassed. "Is it even comfortable that I'm here, even dressed like this?" And looked down at her robe. "It's okay. All your own already, you might say." Barbara Jones laughed. "Oh, he won't be long. Usually pops out quickly and flies off on his important business. He's supposed to bring me my medicine today. I bought it abroad, but we don't have it here." 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Barbara Jones opened the door and let in a dark-haired middle-aged man in a black business suit. He immediately noticed the unexpected guest and stared at her with his brown eyes. "Hello." He muttered, "Good morning, I mean day." Amber stammered. An awkward silence followed. Now Barbara Jones hastened to interrupt it. "Sit down, both of you, to tea. I'll explain everything in a moment." She introduced the young people and clattered around the table, adding another cup and plate. In passing, she told the story of meeting Amber. "So it's a walrus we have as a guest." It turns out the man laughed. "Walruses," Barbara Jones picked up quietly, surrounded by swans. "It's Swan Lake in a new way. In a muddy river in the center of town." "You two have the same sense of humor, I see," Amber pointed out. "You take no offense, if anything," the woman said. "We've had some loving already, you might say, family-style teasing." At this, Amber blushed, glancing at Michael and at her, then at her mom. There was a pause. "Okay, something gaffy and wrong," Barbara Jones said. "Michael, let me do a better job of telling you what Amber is studying for. It might be interesting for you and her to talk about it." She was right. The two young people got into a conversation about promoting laundry detergents, cleaning products, and the like, and unnoticeably switched to you. And yet, I believe Amber was saying, that slogan, "boil things," then we're coming to you, was perfect. It hit the audience of the time, was memorable even to us in lectures. Those commercials were cited as an example because they were 2 decades old. Michael nodded. "Okay, let's leave that powder alone, that makes sense, but how would you advertise not a certain product, but a kitchen sponge? Let's say a regular dishwashing sponge." "I won't come up with slogans right away, of course, but I would show its versatility, that not only plates can be scrubbed with it, but also windowsills, like tiles, for example. Maybe you could write it in the script of the video. Let's try to place in social networks shortly. So, concisely, thesis." "We should do it in broad strokes," Amber smiled. "Sure, I understand the style. I can think about it at my leisure." "That's good," said Barbara Jones, who was watching them with a smile. "I'm glad you two like each other. And now, dear guests, it's time to do the honors. I mean, Michael, since you're here. Got the girl home. Almost all her clothes are dry by now, but her jacket isn't." "Yeah, I'll take a cab," Amber replied. "Why would a college girl want to splurge?" the woman objected. "Michael's all over town. He'll still find a store to check out on your outskirts, I'm sure." Amber let the store talk pass her lips. The truth was revealed to her a little later, and that afternoon Michael drove her home and suggested they meet again. "We'll talk in a couple days, we'll go." On the appointed day, he invited her to his office, and they spent several hours discussing the scenarios proposed by the girl. Another week later, he brought her to the shooting of a video clip to observe the process and make edits if necessary. And a couple more weeks later, they celebrated the end of their first project together in a restaurant. "Isn't that too expensive of a place to celebrate for one modest social media video?" Amber asked the chef at the entrance to the luxurious establishment. "But you're worthy of it," Michael proclaimed. "And do you remember that slogan?" Amber sat down at the table, smiling. "But the cake is your humble firm." Don't tell. Michael stretched out cryptically. "I have not just one store, but a whole chain. I have a factory that produces household chemicals and a logistics company that handles deliveries, and another one, which leads supplies from abroad that we do not produce here. I'm afraid to ask." Amber laughed. "So you're a millionaire?" "Well, yes," Michael answered simply. They turned the conversation back to advertising. Afterward, they talked about other things. Their childhood, their parents. It turned out that Michael had bought his mom an expensive apartment. They talked about their hobbies. Amber liked to volunteer to help homeless animals, and Michael was fond of sports, tennis, rock climbing. At the end of dinner, he suggested the girl meet at Andrew's place of business. "I like you very much," he said. "You're not just a pretty girl. There are a lot of those. You're very smart and clearly have a great future as a marketing manager." "I like you too," Amber smiled. "Let's give it a shot. We hit it off pretty well when we worked together. And you don't seem to care about my millions," Michael said. "And there are plenty of mercenaries out there these days." "For me, the main thing is a person," she replied. "You're interesting and easy for me, as if I'd known you all my life." That night, Amber could not believe that her new beau was really a millionaire. But gradually, she saw the extent of his empire. When they were dating, Michael was constantly dropping by on business at various points in his vast company. So she realized that he was actually the owner of a large factory, several companies, and dozens of stores. "This is for you," he said one evening when they were having dinner at his house in a cottage in an upscale village, handing the girl a luxurious necklace. "These stones look suspiciously like diamonds." Amber laughed. "Where would a poor student wear something like that?" "I don't know," Michael shrugged. "To prom or home for me to wear?" He glanced meaningfully at the girl. "So let's slow down," Amber said, suddenly serious. "This is not how I was raised." "I'm not trying to buy you," Michael wondered. "It's from the heart." "What do you expect in return?" "A bed," Amber countered. "I'm not a rich girl from a simple family. I grew up in the country, and I'm not used to luxury. But that doesn't mean I do anything for expensive things." "That's not what I meant," Michael said. "I think you did," she said. "You don't just give money like that." She picked up her purse, put on her boots, and reached for her coat. But Michael snatched it from her and gallantly opened it behind her back. "Amber, wait, I'll take you," he said peacefully. "Don't boil, you've got it all wrong." "Okay," the girl looked him straight in the eyes. "But just so you know, just in case, I will live with a man only in a legal marriage and in no other way." She opened the door and left. Michael was so shocked by her reaction that he found nothing better than to drink a shot of rum and call his friend Andrew. A former classmate and now a successful lawyer, he rushed over. The men spent the rest of the evening discussing these strange, unpredictable women. Months passed. Michael and Amber's romance continued, but the relationship never moved to a new stage. All the same innocent dates in parks, dinners, trips to the theater and movies, the girl behaved extremely modestly, and the man did not know how to approach her, remembering her reaction last time. "You know, I'm seriously thinking about getting married," Michael admitted to Andrew. "But how long can such platonic encounters last nowadays? It's weird." "I cannot understand why she is so insistent on official marriage," he replied. "Really lives in the wrong century. There must be some other reason." "I don't see any reason," Michael said. "Is this a well-thought-out plan? What if you're her target?" Andrew wondered. "And your manipulation of the marriage?" "I'm the one pushing for a relationship, not her. Amber's just responding to my suggestion. They're taking the initiative. That would be suspicious if she was hanging on to me." So she hung herself from afar unnoticed. "I don't get your point. Look, she could have found out when your mom was at the park, picked a day when you were supposed to visit her. That's when you crossed the river." "Oh, come on, what is this nonsense? You said yourself she's smart. A girl's too eager to get married after a couple months of dating. When she becomes a modest wife, she'll want a piece of your fortune." "You're not thinking straight," Michael said. "Why are you telling me this?" "You're just suspicious of everyone in the line of duty. If I'm professionally deformed," Andrew said, "it's because the whole stream has come in. Even relatives are willing to cut each other's throats over some minimal inheritance. But what are you comparing? There's no comparison. That's the point. It's not about Nikki's grandmother's apartment. It's about your $1 million. It's not what you'd do for a winter swim in the river. I think your imagination's running wild. That kind of sneakiness is not Amber's style." "Let's check it out," Andrew suggested. "First, let's see if she has a criminal record. You know I can dig into police databases through people I know." "Go ahead, do it," Michael replied. "No way," he thought as he drove home from the meeting. "Amber's a decent girl. What kind of past could there be?" She told him that she'd always studied hard and she'd never had time for suitors. Not that she'd gotten involved in bad things, but his confidence was shaken when Andrew called him and told him what he'd found out. "Well, no surprise there. Your potential fiancée was in juvie records when she was a teenager." "And that doesn't sound like her." That's all Michael could say. Andrew, "For what?" "Ha ha, fraud," Andrew said. "They've got her on a watch list." Aside, no other details. There was silence. After 10 seconds, Michael spoke up. "In that case, it would be a good idea to check the bride for lies. But how do we do that?" "I'll have to think about it," Andrew replied. "I'll call you one of these days when I think of something." A week later, Michael invited Amber for a walk in the same park that had been the reason for their acquaintance, and gently initiated the conversation. "Listen, I have an idea. If we're going to get married, you need to get up to speed on the family business. I suggest you try running one of my many firms. Me, a student. but you're studying to be a manager, an executive. All these firms will be in common for the rest of our lives. So the sooner you get up to speed, the better. Michael, I'm not sure I can do this. You'll get used to it. In the meantime, I'm going to give you someone with experience to help you. He insisted. What kind of company do you want me to take over? I'll put you in charge of a company that runs a chain of stores. Try to increase sales. Trust, to be honest, replied the girl. Okay, I agree. Let's give it a try. Well, took the bait. Andrew asked Michael half an hour later, whom he called right after the breakup with Amber. Yeah, so much so that your plan partially succeeded. About the rest of it, did you get the paperwork ready? Yes, as agreed. I left a loophole in the contract. Yours is almost studying the law at the Institute, and having read it, should realize that she can reissue the company to herself at any time without your permission. She can notify you after the fact. But you've thought of me too. How do I get off the hook if something happens? Of course, the legality of this contract could be challenged. I won't bore you with the legalities. Just don't sign this document personally. In that just, the rest is my business. I believe in your legal talents, but I hope we're wrong. Although you're right that you can't be sure of anything these days. Especially picked up by Andrew with her track record, a history of cheating. Week after turning in her summer session, Amber began her new duties. The girl applied all her knowledge and devoted all her time to the job. Barbara Jones spent part of the day in the office and part traveling to retail outlets. Now do you realize what it means to live at work? Michael asked her. Yes. Now I do. Why did you take every opportune moment to drop in to check on some store or suppliers and lobbyists of yours? Even during our dates, the girl smiled. Everything needs to be kept under control, Michael uttered with a most serious look. Right, Amber replied and playfully put her hand to her temple as if saluting like the military. After familiarizing herself with all the stores, researching the markets in each area, the demand of the locals and the supply of competitors, Amber set up a flurry of activity. First, she met with all the suppliers from the plan Michael owned and those his logistics company handled, and adjusted the orders for each individual store. You see, there are neighborhoods where people are wealthier, and there are bedroom communities where people are used to saving money, she explained to Michael. And we offer them the same assortment everywhere. Yeah, well, I tried to give people a choice. They can't always afford expensive hand cream, for example. They don't really need it, and its presence just annoys people. But okay, I'll try to change the assortment. And I really like what you said. We're offering it to them. It's good that you consider this business partially yours already. Amber cracked a smile, for she hadn't realized the ambiguity of that phrase, and doubled down on her efforts. In the next step, she hired new merchandisers who worked on product placement. Then she talked to the sales teams and listened to all their complaints and requests. People are asking for an hour shorter workday, she reported to Michael. The shifts are big now, 12 hours. That's because it's more profitable for me, and the employees can't complain. But they're on a 2x2 schedule. It's not like they're working 12 hours every day. How did you shorten the shift? At the expense of lunch, which no one uses. They take 15 minutes for a snack anyway and go back to work. Taking care of people is great. But what's it going to do to sales? Do you really think it's for the better? Because our employees are mostly family people. They can't afford to spend an hour at home. And normally rested, satisfied people work better with energy and desire to try. So who will stay in the stores in the evenings? We can't just make the whole chain work not until 8 as it is now, but until 7. That's when the most sales are. People are coming home from work and popping in on their way to pick up all sorts of household supplies. I completely understand, Amber nodded. That's why I propose we institute a floating schedule for employees. Some will come to work an hour late and stay until closing, and some will be on time for 8:0 like now, but leave at 19:0. Okay, give it a try. Michael gave the go-ahead. And Amber wasn't wrong. The satisfied employees almost carried her in their arms. A plus in her piggy bank was also the way she handled the situation with the saleswoman, who was almost fired for sloth. She was sitting in the back room crying, she told Michael. I went over and questioned her. Turns out the tough-looking girl is disabled and hides it, because she's afraid she won't get hired. Dear, but we have a serious load, and the goods are laid out, and the buyers with the choice to help, and a lot of things for the shift must be done. That's how she would cope if she didn't have to walk. She has a form of cerebral palsy where her arms work well but her legs don't walk well. So what do you suggest? Michael looked at Amber with interest. I see you have a fire in your eyes. You obviously know how to help the poor thing. Of course I do. You've got the packaging lines at the factory where they make cleaning products, and there's just sit-ins to check the quality of the packaging. She doesn't need to run around for that. You're a genius, Michael said sincerely, and Vika knew everything and must have already arranged for the transfer. And she has. Amber winked at him. The girl was respected by everyone from the cleaning staff to the suppliers. Plus profits were up. When Michael saw the figures for 2 months, he was literally dumbfounded. The student suddenly turned out to be an effective manager and was clearly not going to steal anything from her fiancé. At the end of August, Michael invited her to a country club on Big Lake. Celebrate your success on yachts to ride and at the same time seriously talk to us need. So he announced the meeting of the girl. When they arrived, they were met by the club steward. He led them under the awning on the shore, where a waiter was already waiting at the table. He opened a bottle of champagne and filled their glasses. They took a sip of the drink and began a light appetizer of fruit and cheese. You did it in a way I never imagined, Michael admitted. I'm surprised. I wanted you to be a part of the family business. I knew you could do better, but you've exceeded my expectations. Thanks for the compliment. Amber smiled. It's not a compliment. It's just unconditional recognition of all your strengths, your intelligence, your ingenuity. Theoretical knowledge successfully put into practice. I'm blushing now, the girl said, embarrassed. Wait, don't interrupt. And all these qualities are complemented by beauty, good character, the ability to understand other people, to help them. In short, I love you. Marry me, he blurted out. No, unexpected, said Amber's ex. But I agree, of course, I love you too. The young people reached across the table and kissed each other tenderly. They spent the rest of the evening discussing their feelings, genuinely admiring each other with no talk of business, shopping, or household chemicals. However, it was not completely without chemistry. It took place between two lovers. Will you come to the wedding? September 1, Michael laughed, calling Andrew to tell him about the results of their secret experiment. First time in first grade. Don't you get the idea? He mumbled. What's the point? It's just that we couldn't find any symbolic date in the near future. And here is the beginning of a new school year and the beginning of our family life. That's how it is. Why don't you postpone it? I can't. I can't wait to get married any faster. And we didn't bother with pretty numbers like people pick the day, month, year. 3 7s, 3 8s, that sort of thing. The important thing is that we're together. And yeah, why wait? So we picked a date that's more or less meaningful. Then we'll send the kids off to school. We'll have a double celebration every time. Judging by your voice, you are in some kind of euphoria. Andrew did not share Michael's joy. Michael didn't share Andrew's joy. Andrew had already had children and seen the future. Yeah, the future's pretty much set too. I'm going to give Amber the entire chain of stores as a competent manager. It'll be my wedding present. Are you crazy? All these years of earning it all and now you're giving it to the first woman you meet, Andrew said. Don't talk about my future wife like that, Michael said indignantly, because I'm sure she's up to no good. She does everything for a reason, Andrew continued. I don't give a rat's ass about that, Michael snapped. I come to you with joy, with good news, and you're trying to ruin my mood. It'll be too late. Maybe she hasn't given up the company yet because she knows you're checking up on her. But when she gets married, she'll trust you, and then she'll get her hands on it. Calm down, Miss Etiams, Michael said. Really, I don't want to see you at my wedding with that attitude. He pressed off on his cell phone. They began the pleasant task of preparing for the celebration. The bride's parents couldn't help. They were embarrassed. Come to the wedding? Their daughter persuaded them. But simple rural laborers were afraid of such luxury and promised to arrive in a week to congratulate the newlyweds at a less lavish event. So all the preparations were engaged in Amber and Barbara Jones. She was helping her with everything. Honey, if you don't want my advice, I'm out of my league. You just tell me. I will not take offense, the woman delicately told the future daughter-in-law. No way. With this job, I do not have time for anything. And even study is coming up. holiday, and in September in the university to work hard. So I'm very happy to have your support, Amber said. The women had chosen a beautiful wedding dress for Amber with a puffy skirt, long sleeves, and open shoulders. It was understated enough. The girl didn't want to be naked. I don't like all this nudity, she said. Some brides look as if they are not going to create a family, and in a brothely, skirts barely cover the navel, the breasts cut out almost fall out. I'm not a prude, but I like your old-fashionedness about it, Barbara Jones replied. It really is a day that is associated with modesty, innocence, purity, and a girl preparing to be a faithful wife and caring mother, Amber agreed. And I'm glad you're obviously not going to be the kind of mother-in-law that scares your daughter-in-law, she laughed. I think we're getting along well, Barbara said. Together they made a guest list and chose a lakeside restaurant where they agreed to have the reception right on the shore. They ordered food, drinks, decorations, and, of course, the bridal bouquet. Amber chose simple white roses for the reception. So, Amber, you ready? Barbara Jones asked her future daughter-in-law an hour before the ceremony, adjusting her veil. They were preparing to leave the house for the restaurant. Everything was already ready there, with a registrar and an excited groom waiting for it. He had already called his former mom several times to clarify whether everything was in order. The bride was not going to run away. Son, I assure you, laughed the woman. Oh, wait, we will be there soon. Do not worry. And don't make my car nervous on such an important day. And so the ceremony began. Michael, happy, smiled a little foolishly, seeing his bride in her wedding dress for the first time. She walked up to the groom. They held hands, turned to the registrar, and prepared to hear some of the most important words in life. But instead, the nightmare began. Well, dear guests, greetings. Andrew came barreling into the room, drunk as a kite. Michael put his arm around Amber and glared angrily at his friend. His legs were tangled. He held a half-empty bottle of cognac in his hand. Oh, white roses are defenseless, without thorns, Andrew wiggled, noticing the flowers Amber was holding. And you all know about this touching bride. He turned to the crowd. I told you I didn't invite you to the wedding. Michael shouted. What are you doing here? This is a public place. You came if you wanted to. It's strange that you, with all your money, didn't provide a private area, Andrew said. It's none of your business. Go away. Don't make a scandal, Michael asked, his tone softening as he guessed what Andrew was going to do. Don't you shut me up, he shouted. She's a fraud. You see, she keeps her mouth shut and doesn't yap. And he pointed his finger in Amber's direction. The cat knows whose meat she's eaten. What are you talking about? Amber asked calmly. Ask about your past. We all know about your juvenile record. You and Michael and I had you specially checked out, and we know all about your criminal record. Is that true? The girl turned to her fiancé. He averted his eyes and remained silent. And they didn't put you in charge of the stores by accident. Andrew blurted out. We found out the reason you were put on the pencil when you were young. That's why we wanted to see if you'd cheat now. You couldn't have failed to notice that you could have taken over the firm by deed. Yes, I noticed, but I thought it was your mistake. It was you, Andrew, as a lawyer, who drew up the contract. And I thought I had inadvertently missed that point. Michael didn't mention it so as not to drive a wedge between you two. You two are friends, I thought. Oh, you're so kind. Andrew took offense. The one who sort of feeds the birds on a very lucky day. So her millionaire mom can pull her out of the water. Michael, say something. Amber squeezed her fiancé's hand and looked him straight in the eye. But he remained silent in utter confusion, and the girl realized it was all true. How could you? Ashley asked only. Her eyes filled with tears. She let go of Michael's hand and ran out of the hall. Barbara Jones ran after her. God, what have I done? Michael realized and collapsed powerlessly onto the nearest table. He covered his face with his hands and began rocking back and forth. Late past, the man had cut off Amber's cell phone and was on call almost around the clock at her apartment door. But the girl simply disappeared. Not at home, did not show, nor at the institute. He realized that he had offended her very much and wanted to explain himself. He chose words that could somehow justify him. But he realized that everything was in vain and the phrases themselves came out empty, and there was no one to listen to him now. Desperate, he went to his mother. What a fool I am. He was almost tearing his hair out. Why didn't I talk to her before all this? Now I don't know what to think. Amber really is bad. What do you think, Michael? Whatever the truth is, you should have gotten it from Amber directly instead of setting up some sneaky test, Barbara Jones replied reproachfully. Maybe it was just some childish prank that led to her being put on the books. What if she had admitted that she had set the whole thing up with our acquaintance, and that she had used you to it? Continued tormenting Michael as if he couldn't hear her words. I repeat, the woman raised her voice, would have asked her directly, and whatever she told you would have been an honest conversation. But you see how she acted. She was shocked by what you did, so she trusted you and didn't intend anything bad herself. Oh, she took it into account. What was she put in jail for then? Not quite an innocent sheep then. Have you never branded people for nothing? Barbara Jones said quietly. About me, for instance. Do you know everything? What do you mean? Well, listen to this. And Barbara Jones began her story. Back then, by the way, I was about your current age. In a 96, Barbara got off work, sat on a bench at the bus stop and cried. They hadn't given her her paycheck again. They said it would be a week late. What will I feed Michael with? She thought in horror. My mom has already taken out all the vegetables from the dacha. She doesn't have enough herself. We should help her plant a vegetable garden. But still, we will not grow so much that we all have enough for the winter. What can we do? She worked as a dentist at the district clinic. They paid her at least a little, but usually on time. But in the last 6 months, they started giving her regular breakfast. Barbara couldn't cope on her own. She had no one to ask for help. Michael's father left them long ago and went to Alaska with his new wife. And Barbara's mother was a pensioner, and so every penny she gave to her daughter and grandson. She herself lived on food grown at the dacha. Thayer Jones could not go on like this. In her head rushed thoughts of finding a part-time job. But what kind of work could she find? A cleaner. But now half the city has part-time nurses at our clinic. Anyway, they'll delay the payment of money. Where do they pay a decent wage nowadays? Unless they're market vendors. How about working in a store? There's always cash there. She took a handkerchief out of her purse and wiped her tears. There was a grocery store nearby. Barbara headed there with determination so that she could realize her idea and get a second job as soon as possible. Once inside, she was dumbfounded. There was an ineffable aroma in the air. It was the odor of a homeless person, sausage thrown away and no money. Blinking as if in pain, Barbara felt her stomach cramping with hunger. She went to look for the store manager, but he wasn't there. The elderly receptionist said he would be back in about half an hour. Fleshing, the woman decided to wait, and those minutes seemed like hell. She wanted to eat, but she had nothing with her. To save money, she ate only breakfast and dinner, some porridge or pasta with vegetables which she took from her mother. I've already forgotten what meat tastes like, Barbara realized. The last time they bought meat was 3 years ago for New Year's Eve. Now the only thing left at home was bread. What will Michael eat? Again, her thoughts returned to her son. The next events unfolded for her like a blur. Here she asks to weigh 200 grams of sausage, then catches the contemptuous look of the seller, goes to the cash register, shoves the sausage in her purse, and at the entrance she is held by the administrator's elbow. You haven't paid? Let's go to the back. She was led there, where the fluorescent lights shone dimly. It smelled of unwashed clothes. Apparently some workers were changing clothes here, probably movers. Barbara leaned back against the wall. Tears rolled from her eyes. What's the matter, daughter? Daughter, said the receptionist in a suddenly affectionate sympathy. Why did you become a thief? I can see you're a decent woman. Barbara burst into tears and, sobbing, told him that they had no money, their son was growing up, and she herself was very hungry. Here, take this, said the elderly man. He went out and returned with a sausage sandwich wrapped in wrapping paper. My wife used to wear too much with me. I can't get any more to work. Eat it. Barbara greedily gnawed into the sandwich and swallowed it in several bites. Afterward, she felt uneasy. The man laughed. There are hard times, no argument. But stealing is the last thing you do. Have you heard of the Christian commandments? Barbara shrugged and nodded uncertainly. Yeah, we're just getting a revival of religiosity right now, the man said. There's that commandment, thou shalt not steal, and many more good rules. I'll let you go now. I feel sorry for you, desperate and with a child. Just promise to read the Bible. If you find it good, yes, was all the woman answered, not believing it had turned out so well. And I truly believe that everything will be all right. The temporary difficulties will pass and life will get better. Knowing this, I then step out of that gloomy back room into the sunlight, Barbara Jones now recounted, and it was as if I had been reborn. I believed what that wise and kind man had said. I didn't even know his name or middle name. That's quite a story, Mom. Michael stretched out in surprise. Didn't you tell me then, or? And you were a young man then, finishing school. You had your own things to do. Studying, enrollment, friends, first girlfriend. I didn't want to burden you. Yeah, I was unaware we were having financial difficulties. Food seemed to always be there. It seemed to me, and you say you were stealing sausage when you were hungry. Yes, we didn't live in poverty for long. After that incident at the store, things changed. My life got better quickly with a new positive mindset. We're spoken straight, like those modern gurus. Michael laughed. Think good things and it will come. But it did, didn't it? I was offered a job at a private medical center. They were just coming up then. I hesitated, used to, as a Soviet man, to work in state institutions. And private practitioners. Who knows who they are? Whether you can rely on them. But I took a risk and did not fail. The pay was good. So we lived well together. I remember how happy I was when you told me you could pay for tennis lessons. I was just getting into it. Yeah, I remember your happiness, the woman smiled. And now I understand more why you always had such an attitude towards me. That you need to earn money yourself, not to hope for easy money and on chance. That you need to learn, develop, improve your. And then you can achieve a lot with your own mind and your own strength. Yeah, that story had a big impact on me. I tried to give you the right direction to study and work. They were trying to steal the store like I did. But tell me, now that you know this story, do you think your mother's a criminal? No, I mean, sure, you made a mistake, but you had your reasons. That's great. Now think about Amber. Maybe she had her reasons too. So here's the moral. Don't dig into someone else's distant past and don't jump to conclusions without asking the person what happened. I agree. I'm going to apologize to Amber and ask her to come clean. As soon as I find her. When I find her, where could she be? I've searched everywhere. I even called her parents. Why would you involve her parents? The woman got angry. I'm the one who freely, unwillingly heard about your spat. And why upset them? They weren't at the wedding. They didn't see anything. I'm not arguing, Michael. I just asked carefully, so as not to scare them. I just asked them if they'd seen Amber. No, they said, and she hasn't called. Oh, my dumbass, she made a mess of things and now she's got to clean it up. You got the wrong mom? Barbara Jones asked, suddenly giggling. All right, well, I know where she is, because I hid it myself. And you kept quiet while you watched me suffer. That went well for you. You thought about it. You weighed it all out. You made the right decision, not to intrigue, but to talk. Okay, Dana's around my neck. You're still not going to tell me. She's been feeding us for years. Or sent Amber down there so she'd cool her heels and not do anything stupid. And no one would think that a daughter-in-law could hide out with her future mother-in-law. John winked slyly. I'm going now. Michael jumped up and ran out the door. Barbara Jones smiled and crossed herself. An hour later, the man pulled up to a familiar wicket. He really hadn't been here in a long time. The beds were gone. The garden had grown. Pears, apples, plums were leaning under the weight of fruit. Oh, we could use this food someday. Michael thought and stepped into the yard. He saw Amber right away. She was standing under a dense black rowan tree, picking berries and eating them right where they were. When she heard someone come in, she turned around sharply with a startled look. When she saw that it was Michael, she silently turned away and continued eating the rowan berries. Are your lips blue? Michael laughed. Very funny, Amber said. And your back is white. What a joker. If Barbara Jones sent you to talk to me, I'm not ready. Don't pout. Let's talk. And your lips are actually blue. You haven't eaten rowan berries in a long time. Have you forgotten that they get dirty? Oops, said the girl. Well, yes, I did not think. She went into the house. She went to the kitchen sink. Michael followed her unsteadily. I'm not talking to you, Amber said, rubbing her soiled mouth. Okay, then I'll do the talking. You just listen. I'm really sorry about what I did to Andrew. No, I'm not trying to take it out on him. It's just that he's really been bugging me with his suspicions. And you, a grown man with a lot of money, just bought it without checking it out. It turns out that, yes, resentment blinds me. How could I imagine you could pull something like... What about trust? What about asking the person you love directly what's bothering you? I'm sorry. So here I am, asking, can you please tell me what happened? Why were you labeled a fraud? Okay, don't laugh, Amber warned. It's a funny story. I'll be surprised at my naivety. Don't laugh, the girl added inside. When Amber was 15 years old, she started helping animals. She had loved them since she was a little girl. Her parents' private home in the suburbs always had cats and dogs. That's why she couldn't take in any of the homeless strays. Amber, there's plenty of animals. We have a yard full of animals, her mom told her. But where else are we going to get more? The girl agreed, went to the shelters to take care of animals, and then decided to help on the internet. At that time, social networks were already in full swing, and Amber published ads there. She was often asked to help post them. Sometimes even strangers tried to place animals, others collected money for their treatment. The food is in temporary homes with volunteers. Kitty looking for a home 6 months old, by age vaccinated against worms and fleas, treated, preparing for sterilization. Habitually placed it once posted an ad. Please help pay for sterilization, said the ad. It's a little early for that procedure, they do it later, Amber wondered. But maybe they're collecting in advance, knowing how reluctant our people are to donate. She attached a picture of a cute kitten to the text and clicked publish. She hadn't seen the kitty herself, and this time she'd been asked to help with the ad by a complete stranger. But Amber often saw photos of the foundling on her page, so she didn't suspect anything. And a week later, the doorbell rang. Amber Jones. There was a precinct officer on the doorstep. Pack up and follow me. You're being charged with fraud. Astonished, Amber was brought to the neighborhood police station. There, she learned that she was being held because of that particular kitty cat. Butterscotch. Did you place an ad, give a card number where the money should be transferred? The police officer spoke dryly. And you were aware that such an animal does not exist in nature. What do you mean? Stunned girl. That is, so the money was withdrawn from the card? The person to whom it belongs turned out to be an ancient grandmother. She barely heard what happened and said that the card was stolen from her a month ago and she had never heard of any cats. So they blamed it on me, Amber told Michael. And they put me on the books as a fraud. Then the girl deleted her social media page and never contacted me again. So that's it. Michael sighed. Yes. Now you believe that I fed the birds in the park because I love animals. Is that how they decided to meet you? I do, the man said sincerely, looking into her eyes. A month later, the wedding finally took place. The young decided to organize it in a small cafe, where they invited only the closest people. Even Amber's parents dared to come. The celebration was very private and touching. Amber, I swear to always tell you the truth, Michael said before they exchanged rings. I promise I'll never keep anything from you again, Amber said, smiling. They were officially pronounced married. Afterward, as is tradition, the wedding party came up. They said warm words to the newlyweds and handed out gifts and cat food. His Amber and Michael asked the guests to buy, instead of flowers, just the amount they planned to spend on it, for food for the animals at the shelter. So, shall we take it to all the kitties, finally? Said Amber a few days later. Our guests had a truckload of food on their hands. We're on our honeymoon. Michael stretched lazily. I've waited so long for this, Sneaky. And you're already trying to get out of it, he joked. Some people want honey and some people want to eat, she said jokingly. Let's go, all right. Let's pick up our gift for the volunteers. We promised them a year's supply of household chemicals to clean up after the animals. They collected everything they wanted and came to the shelter. They were greeted by 2 or 3 cats. Some of them happily hung around people to be petted. Others sniffed the bags of goodies. The third were a little shy and watched the event from afar. One ginger kitten confidently and cleverly climbed up Michael's pants into his arms, comfortably settled down, as if he had been sitting there all his life, and purred cozily. I think we have a new addition to our little family, Amber laughed. Yeah, I'm starting to see the meaning of he won't just get off your back, Michael smiled. Why not? There's plenty of room in the cottage. Amber, why don't we get a dog? She asked innocently. No rush, honey. We could get a horse too, she chuckled. They returned home with the pet and decided to gather their friends to introduce them to the new member of the family. Even Andrew, who didn't know how to make amends, was invited. "Hi, little guy." He smiled, reaching out to pet the kitten when he arrived. The one looked at him appraisingly, then pulled back and walked away. "Doesn't trust," Michael noted. Taking a closer look, "Andrew, you're not preparing any new surprises for us, are you?" "Guys, you what?" "I'm really sorry for dousing you like that," Andrew said. "And you, Amber, I'm sorry again. I should probably take a break from work, or I only see the bad in people and expect trouble from them." Rax, Michael clapped him on the shoulder. "I've forgiven you, and I'm no longer offended," Amber added. The other guests pulled up. Everyone settled around the hastily set table and raised their wine glasses. After a few minutes, Andrew left and returned with a peculiar expression on his face. "No, look at that." He held a shoe in his hand from which yellow, foul-smelling droplets dripped. "Now we've definitely gotten a blessing. The kitten is guarding our house. A real superhero protector," Michael proclaimed, and everyone laughed. The old man took in a refugee orphan, and when she went up to the study where he wouldn't let her in. When Mrs. Zendia, the neighbor, asked if Maggie could sleep alone that night, it was necessary to confess honestly that she could not. It was frightening to look at her grandmother's empty bed, and impossible not to. The silence was ringing. The surrounding silence was cutting to the ears. Who came up with this omen of stopping the clock in a house when a person dies in it? Grandmother loved her antique clock very much. Its quiet rustle, its soft sound. When Grandma brought little Maggie here, that clock had been here for a long time. Maggie had cried. The first night, Grandma sat on her bed and began to quietly comfort her. "You see, you and I are going to live well together, like girlfriends. I've chosen the coziest corner for your bed. Doesn't the clock bother you? Do you hear it? Maggie, Maggie, Maggie." Maggie quietly nudged the pendulum and cried silently. It couldn't be that Grandma was gone. When she had been told as a 6-year-old that Mommy and Daddy were dead, she hadn't believed it for a very long time. Somewhere they must be now, which means that someday they will come. That's why she flatly refused to leave their common home. She doesn't even remember why she agreed. I guess her grandmother managed to persuade her. Some miraculous way she knew how. At first, Maggie was terribly afraid that she would be taken away by some of the strangers who had appeared in the house after Mom and Dad disappeared. There wasn't a single evil person among them. It was just that they were all complete strangers. She was afraid to even cry in front of them, let alone answer questions. When they asked her something, she didn't just keep silent, but turned away just in case. That way they would get away from her faster, stop noticing her. One day some aunt pestered her. She said she had to go to daycare tomorrow. Maggie turned away and stared at the front door, pretending not to hear anything. Instead of Maggie, the aunt answered with some meaningless nonsense. Her neighbor, Mrs. Lee with the purple curly hair. I can honestly tell you that I'm not surprised. She's a very spoiled girl from Brooklyn. No one's been seriously involved in her upbringing. And just at that moment, the front door, at which Maggie was looking, opened and a short, thin woman in blue jeans and white sneakers with blue flowers quietly entered, who heard everything, because she immediately answered something incomprehensible, though no one had time to ask her. Come on, you are such a close friend to the family to judge about it, and even more confidently express your opinion out loud. Mrs. Lee with the purple hair was loudly indignant. And I'm Maggie's grandmother, her father's mother. I haven't seen you around here, the woman replied. Grandma. Maggie shouted and rushed toward the stranger before she had time to think, just to escape immediately. Well, hello, Maggie. She heard a voice above her, and warm hands stroked her hair. That's right, it's her daddy's mom. She has the same kind and light hands. Daddy had said so often that Maggie had the kindest and most beautiful grandmother that Maggie couldn't wait to see her. She had long been promised to be taken far away to another town to visit her grandmother. And now Grandma had come herself and was just as Papa had described. Daddy never lied. After meeting Grandma, Maggie immediately stopped being afraid of all the terrible fears. It turned out that she and Grandma had no one but each other. Maggie was glad when she learned that it would be just the two of them. It's so good that it's just you and me, Grandma, with no strangers, the girl said. Grandpa would have loved you a lot too. You can be sure of that, Grandma smiled. She wasn't very happy that it was just the two of them with Maggie. There were many pictures of Grandpa in the house, but all in albums and only one on the wall. It showed a young dark-haired man, cheerful and strong, sitting in a boat, and on his lap he held a little boy, a little older than Maggie. The boy was very serious, frowning and gripping the oars tightly. Maggie recognized immediately that this boy was her daddy. They had pictures of him as a child at home, too. Grandma said here they were fishing on the Potomac River. It had been some very fishy summers, and they had had a terrific vacation. And in the early fall, 2 days after returning from vacation, Grandpa was killed in the line of duty. Little Maggie was afraid to ask what those duties were. And Grandma didn't explain the further family story, sad, but also beautiful in some ways. That story the grandmother revealed to the growing Maggie later. Matthew, the girl's father, grew up and left to study in Boston. To his mother's delight and relief, he had absolutely no desire to follow in his father's footsteps. Not drawn to any dangerous service, he simply enrolled as a project engineer. Thoughtful and focused, Matthew was very suited to this specialty. Everyone around him thought so too. No one expected any adventures from the guy. But he did. He fell in love with a girl from a wealthy family. And he didn't just fall in love for a while, he really fell in love. He was like that about everything. And so was the girl Bella. Her mother and stepfather were sure that sooner or later she would marry the son of a family friend, Eugene, with whom the stepfather had a business partnership. The guy was really very shallow, had been educated in England, had come back and was making a solid contribution to his father's business. He was in his early 30s. Financial prosperity was in sight. Why not get married? Mom and stepfather at first quietly, then more and more frankly and firmly began to push student Bella to a favorable, prosperous marriage. At first she joked, perhaps too careful and long, so that the family had time to realize that her refusal is not a whim of a spoiled princess. But it was time to speak seriously. Bella inhaled a little audibly, exhaled noisily, and announced, "The thing is, I have another fiancé." "Who is he?" languidly asked her mother, secretly hoping that the beautiful daughter went to her and knows how to find the best of the possible. And Bella's mother was disappointed, extremely disappointed. The groom turned out to be a young engineer, yesterday's university graduate, who got a job in a small construction firm. Well, he should be. It's not the richest who get the most money. Family makes all the difference. But the groom's mom was the widow of some provincial policeman. And so for the sake of this almost rustic, poor guy, Mom raised her beautiful Bella with clear skin, black eyebrows, and delicate green eyes like almonds. "Love. But I had it, too," Mom said. "I loved your father when I married him, but he got involved in some obscure project and left you and me penniless. If it hadn't been for Stephen, you'd have grown up in a communal flat." Stephen himself, Mom's husband and benefactor, was brief. "Marry Eugene? It's been arranged." Mom was afraid of his strong statements, but Bella was not. She married her Matthew, and her parents kept their promise, cut her out of the family. Especially since they had another daughter growing up, little Olia. Their common daughter with Stephen, surely more successful and promising than Bella, who inherited only debts from her father. Grandmother said to Maggie, "I pass on to you as your mother told me. I add nothing of my own. If you want, you can always look up your mother's side of the family. I once thought it was wrong that they weren't told of your birth. But when your parents died, my relatives were notified, just knowing about it just in case. And deciding for myself. There was nothing to decide here. No one came for Maggie except for Ashley's grandmother. So she had no one else. Now Grandma Ashley was gone, so no one at all alone in the whole wide world. If it wasn't for Archie. You knew Grandma was sick. Yeah, I know, she's not old. My mother's a little younger than your grandmother, as you know. But a bad heart is a bad heart. It can't be helped. You've got to get on with your life, not mourn endlessly." Archie comforted Maggie. He convinced her to go to New York. What's there to catch? He's a car mechanic, albeit a novice, but a good one, with excellent references. If Maggie rented out her and her grandmother's apartment, and he added his savings, and then quickly got a job, they could easily rent a small apartment in a bedroom community in New York City, and still have something to live on. Remember, I told you about my ideas before. But you were so afraid to leave your grandmother, you were glued to her. And now there's nothing keeping you here. Now Maggie really had nothing to hold her. She wouldn't have dared to go to a strange city alone. But New York was her mom's hometown. Plus Archie would be there, and she'd be with him. Aunt Zendaya shook her head. "Oh, Maggie, I don't know. I'll help you rent the apartment. I'll supervise the tenants. But it's so little, barely enough for a room in New York. It's a different price of living there, everything. You're just out of college, you have zero experience. Before you get a job, what are you going to live on? At least you're at home here. And I'll always have a bowl of soup if you need it." "Oh, Aunt Zendaya," Maggie waved her off. "It's just the two of us. Archie's thought it over, and he's got some savings, and he'll find a job with his qualifications. We'll live no worse off than we do here. He knows he'll have to rely on him at first." Aunt Zendaya waved her hand back and forth. She got up from her chair, walked around the room in silence, and finally said, "It's your business, Maggie. The apartment is yours alone, and in that sense there's nothing to be afraid of. But I don't like these fashionable civil marriages without a rosary. It's old-fashioned. It's good and convenient for guys. All these, let's live and see, something does not suit. We'll sort it out, and there's nothing to share. What if you live with a new one every year? And for us girls, what's good in it? Not a wife and not a bride." Aunt Zendaya continued. "It's a trial, a temporary arrangement. What hope is there for him? It would be fine if he himself settled in the city, created a base, as they call it, and then pulled you with him. But no, he decided to stick to his grandmother's apartment, to make his life easier. And maybe you had a nice place of your own. Anyway, we're all our own people." The tactless mention of Grandma could have been taken offense to, but Maggie took no offense. Grandma Ashley would have understood, she said with conviction. Of course, she understood a lot more about relationships than the other adults. Maggie knew that for some reason, if Grandma had been alive, Maggie wouldn't have dared to move so far away from her, and now it didn't matter anymore. It was as if the stars had taken it upon themselves to help Maggie and Archie. Surprisingly, they found decent long-term tenants pretty quickly, a young couple with a toddler. Maggie had prepared in advance, sorted out and neatly stacked her grandmother's wrinkled belongings. She gave it to Aunt Zendaya for safekeeping. She took only her watch with her, though she sent that too into her suitcase in a cozy box, lovingly nestled between her warm sweaters. "They're so bulky. Why do you have to carry them with you?" Archie wondered. "I'm going to hang them in our apartment in New York, so we'll have something of our own," Maggie answered. "Well, if that's the way you want them," Archie agreed generously. In New York, too. Everything worked out as planned. A one-room apartment for the right price and a job for Archie were quickly found. True, the apartment was very cramped and far from the subway, and the job on the opposite side of the city. But that didn't matter much if you didn't pick on the little things. Maggie organized her closet and hung her grandmother's clock on the wall. She went shopping, boiled some borscht at home, and sat down at her laptop. She had to look for a job. Of course, she has no experience, but in college she took first place in hairdressing and creative competitions. Maggie has diplomas, and she agrees to the most modest salary, as long as there is an opportunity to gain experience. Returning from work, Archie several days in a row caught the same picture: a clean apartment. Lunch on the stove. Focused Maggie sends her resume to the salons. "We decided not to dwell on it," Archie said. "You'd think I couldn't provide for you on my own. I blame you and drive you to work. But it's not like that at all. As far as I'm concerned, you don't have to work at all. Not while we're renting at this price, anyway. And if they raise the price, you can raise the price for your tenants." "I can't do that," Maggie sighed honestly. "I told you how hard it was to rent my grandmother's and my grandmother's apartment. The only thing that made me feel better was that Eugene and Natasha were really nice guys. And their son Timmy is a wonderful, healthy baby who loves to smile and sing his long songs in his crib. I couldn't let anyone worse live in our apartment. And I can't raise the price on these people." "You're my favorite little fool," Archie grinned patronizingly, hugging her. "Okay, I'll take care of the problems myself, but I need you not to be busy and tired, but to wait for me at home with dinner. I'm really so tired in this car service that if you also come tired from some beauty salon." Then on only bought dumplings, I will not last long. I'm not quite settled here yet. I'm going to have to step it up a notch if I'm going to get anywhere. Why don't you stay home for a while? We thought it'd be easier and better that way. You've done such a good job organizing it like it's our own apartment. And you can walk around the city until midnight so you don't get bored while I'm at work. Other girls wish their boyfriend would support them. And you like the workday, the job, the whimsy? Maggie was embarrassed. Indeed, she'd earn a pittance and deprive her Archie of a fresh lunch and dinner every day. If they don't squander the money, they can get by. It's not like she's going to go to the theaters and concerts. That's fine. They'll get along just fine without her earnings. Summer came, and Archie's assurance that she had nothing to work for now came in very handy. Although it was a cool, windy summer with frequent rain, it was still a beautiful summer. The city no longer seemed unprincipled and gray to Maggie when there was thick shade, fresh green in the parks. And the river didn't look so stark anymore. One day Maggie went into the Museum of Natural History and didn't notice herself spending 3 hours there. At dinner, she told Archie about it. Let's go together again this weekend. I didn't have time to look at and memorize everything. And then we'll go somewhere else. Why did we come here if we can't see anything? We came here to earn, not to spend, Archie explained condescendingly. I can see it all later, if I want to. Archie was working hard and saving money for some important plans, which he promised to tell me about later. Vivian, a neighbor on the floor, with whom Maggie had become friends, thought that Maggie was lucky to have Archie. Your husband's a hard worker. He's got a lot of determination for his age. He'll bring everything into the house, I can tell. You know how infantile guys are these days. Take my Kieran. We've had a son for 2 years, and for my husband the main thing is his friends, his company. They always have to rush to help at the first call, no matter what his wife has other plans. She is not bored with the child. Son is always fun. Most of them are selfish. So you've still got a good one. Although you're pretty, Maggie could find someone better, not someone who wouldn't take you out, but not a sure thing. So yeah, your Archie thing is pretty good. Maggie, after Vivian had talked about her options, felt uncomfortable complaining that she was missing something. She had a very different idea of their life in the big city. She felt like they'd been together for 100 years. And Archie no longer loved her the way he used to. He comes home from work tired, often irritable over nothing, lying on the couch waiting for food, and he looks at Maggie as if she were something ordinary, as if she always had been and always would be, like a radiator. It's true that he changes at night, especially before the weekend, remembering affectionate words, promising to think of something interesting for the vacation. I guess it's the fatigue, the worry. Will he be able to achieve something in a foreign city, in a megalopolis? It's certainly hard to settle in. After all, Archie works alone for 2 people. Everything is getting more expensive so fast, and the landlord hints at a pay rise. We'll have to find a job after all. At first, Archie will grumble, but then he'll realize that it's better this way, and I'm busy. I don't have time to be bored and think of silly things. And it will be interesting, because a hairdresser is a man of art, my favorite profession. Maggie thought about it, consulted with Vivian, and decided to try another tactic of job search. Nothing comes of sending out resumes listing children's contest prizes from college. When you have no experience at all, there are probably 1,000 girls sending out 1,000 resumes at the same time. Go to the neighborhood salons yourself, Vivian advised her grandmother's old method. But in your profession, it can work. A hairdresser has to be personable. When I first saw you, I thought lucky for us that the neighbor's such a nice girl rented an apartment. So walk around, smile, and socialize. Maggie thought it might help. In the expensive luxury salon from the street, of course, will not take, but in a simple barbershop, as they have in their town at the bathhouse, quite possible. And Maggie, having hardly waited for Archie to leave for work, set off in search of happiness. There were plenty of salons and establishments with a modest barbershop sign nearby. 4 salons didn't show the slightest interest in her, but at a tiny, modest, semi-basement salon with the glamorous name Orchid, the bored brunette perked up after a brief conversation with Maggie. Oh, I need a replacement immediately. My assistant is not a bad girl, but she has a tumultuous personal life and is unreliable. It's not about her at all. She has to be replaced all the time. The boss doesn't care which one of us works. as long as it's not at a loss. I'm really sick of this unpredictability, and it's useless to talk. I can see you're different. If I put a question to the owner, either me or Olia, he will ask her, because he knows very well who is worth what here. He doesn't pay much, so he doesn't have the nerve to count on a supermaster. It's just convenient that I live one floor up. I'd have looked for something better a long time ago. But it's convenient for picking up my daughter from school. It's a local neighborhood. Same grandmothers and aunts for years. The demands aren't too fancy. I'm sure you've been practicing on the same neighbors back home. Yeah, well, nothing unexpected. Leave me your phone number. I'll call you when I need to fill in. My name is Rita. I promise to get you ready. Maggie liked the confident Rose. But for some reason the air in the semi-basement orchid seemed musty, sickly sweet, dizzy and nauseous. She politely said goodbye and hurried outside, where she barely made it to the corner of the house before vomiting into the grass. Maggie felt a little better, but suddenly she felt a strange weakness, as if all her strength had gone at once. She was even a little frightened and decided not to go home, but first to Vivian. V, I think I might get a job, but it's a long shot, she said from the doorway. Are you so pale? Vivian marveled at the look on her face. Maggie sighed and told her what had happened to her. Vivian shook her head thoughtfully. I don't want to scare you. It's better to test right away and eliminate the assumption. I have a pregnancy test lying around in my medicine cabinet. What kind of test? Maggie didn't understand. Are you 100% sure you can't be pregnant? Then I'm jealous. Vivian waved her hands. Do you think we're from the middle of nowhere? Of course we're using protection. Archie himself. Maggie smiled, not used to discussing such things. Yeah, I believe every word you say, Vivian nodded. When people say to me, how handsome Greg is, I say, what do you want? It's electronically verified. We were planning for later, like 5 years from now. But he had his own way. You found it, take a test and don't think about horrors in advance. Maybe there's nothing. Or maybe there is, but it'll be fine. Maggie hadn't thought to ask Vivian how best to break the news to Archie. Hints were silly, it should be direct, but at the right moment, not from the doorstep, but when Archie had eaten dinner and rested a little. She waited until nightfall. And when the lights went out, she whispered in a half-whisper. Archie, I'm pregnant. I'm sure you are. The smells in the barbershop made me sick. Vivian gave me a test and it showed 2 stripes. Oh, really? You're not kidding me. Archie stretched out lovingly. You know I don't get such stupid jokes. I'm serious. Vivian told me that they also had a baby despite the measures. It's not uncommon. I will try to edit the text, keeping its basic content and style, replacing names and cities with American ones, dividing it into paragraphs, emphasizing dialogues and eliminating phraseology. No method could be completely trusted. Maggie didn't know what to say next. She fell silent, and silence hung. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall. Why was Archie silent too? He's gathering his thoughts. Now he's going to put his arm around her, say, don't worry, we'll get through this. I don't see the problem. I'll take care of it. It must have been half an hour before Maggie decided to speak again. Archie, it scares me when you don't talk like that. Maggie, I don't mean to say it's your fault alone. So you go to the doctor tomorrow and find out how much it'll cost to get it stopped quickly. And I'll give you whatever you need from my savings. It was as if she'd heard a completely alien voice. Maggie reached out a shivering, frozen hand, fumbled for the lamp switch, and turned on the light, as if she wanted to make sure it was her Archie. It was him. And he shielded himself from the light with his hand. Well, what have you done to me now? Well, you're not hysterical. Are you going to tell me you want a baby? That doesn't make any sense. Why would we want one, especially now? Maggie tried to catch his gaze, but he shivered with his palm and curved his mouth in displeasure. Her ability to speak suddenly returned to her. I didn't want anyone, because I just didn't think about it. I can't abort. If I already have a child, I'll love it. My grandmother told me my father was happy when he found out I was coming. Although he and my mom had nothing at that time, he just loved her very much. So he loved their child right away. That is me. Of course, your dad's a noble knight, and I'm a scoundrel. Did you ever think that he hoped to make peace with his rich wife's family by having a child? No. And that's life, baby. Maggie silently slipped into her flip-flops, went into the kitchen, and cried with her head on the table. Whether her daddy was counting on something or not, he still wouldn't be able to clean it up quickly, so to speak. Maggie knows for a fact that daddy couldn't have done that. She carried a small photograph behind her passport cover. There, Matthew and Nellie are squatting, holding the handles on either side of a tiny little girl in a crimson jumpsuit who has just learned to walk. Daddy, Mommy. I don't have anyone else to support me, Maggie whispered. Stop whimpering, she heard a good-natured voice above her. Go to bed. Tomorrow, if you're afraid, they'll take you to the doctor. Well, I'm sorry about that. Soon you won't even remember it. I'm not getting rid of the baby. Of course you're in favor of creating poverty. I could have guessed that when you were picking up stray cats with kittens. But I'm not a stray. Maggie interrupted him quietly. Look, why don't you get some sleep, calm down, and then we'll talk sensibly in the morning. I'm tired as a dog at work, and there's drama at home. I'm going to go sleep somewhere. If you want to talk without drama, call me. Maggie watched Archie silently as he folded his things without looking at her and threw his underwear and clothes into his gym bag. Don't worry, he'll play free wolf, cool down, and come back. He'll apologize. The main thing is to keep your tail pistol and everything with him. And first pretend to be mortally offended and convinced that perfectly well do without him, exhorted and admonished Maggie Vivian. I don't have to pretend I'll get along just fine without him, if not fine. You'll have to get along awfully well, Maggie assured her grimly. Why are you so downhearted? Vivian continued to comfort her, not very confidently. Maggie interrupted her. I'm sorry, friend, you're the best. But don't do this. He doesn't need me. I saw it last night. I don't know why I didn't see it before. Not when I was handy, when he needed me. Aunt Zendasia was right. If I didn't have the money from selling my grandmother's apartment, he wouldn't have brought me here with him. He'd have left alone, promised to come back for me, and disappeared. Archie was gone. Maggie couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears, crying and angry at herself for not being able to hold back her tears. It was as if Vivian had read her mind. That's right. Don't be shy with me, Cry. How much do you need? You'll calm down quicker that way. I know what I'm talking about. We fools believe we're loved, that they'll take care of us. Sometimes we're lucky not to be wrong, but often we're not. Archie never came back. Calming down, if you could call her confused state that, Maggie looked around the apartment and realized there were no things left in it for him to come back for. All the little things they had managed to acquire for the house mattered only to Maggie herself. Archie had taken his clothes. Now he was probably staying with the single Kieran, whom he had made friends with at his new job. He so enjoyed the coziness and the dinners Maggie cooked from his grandmother's recipes with imagination. Was he so scared of the baby that he was even willing to sacrifice his comfort? Maggie endured a full week and dialed his number after all. The subscriber's phone is switched off or out of range, the mechanical voice reported. Maybe we should go see him at work, after all, Vivian reasoned aloud, trying to dispel Maggie's confusion. Would you like me to ask Kieran? He won't say no. He's such a chatterbox. It's not hard for him to talk man to man. At least find out how your Archie's feeling. Maggie looked up at her. She'd lost weight, her face strained. If in the last week, the already troubled green-brown eyes seemed huge on him. And like that, as if you couldn't see it yet, she said tiredly, maybe he's not sure yet. Do you know how cowardly they really are? Yeah, Maggie said with a strained smile. I'm all out of money. I'm out of the deposit from the sale of my grandmother's apartment, which I used to pay for this place. If I keep spending that money, I won't be able to pay the landlord anytime soon. Next month already. There is, of course. But I can't. I want to cry so badly, Maggie said tiredly. And Archie knows how the money is, and he doesn't care. What have you decided about the baby? Vivian asked cautiously. I don't know what to decide. I wouldn't forgive myself. It's not a question of the child itself, but what will live on when it's born and I can't work yet. I have no one, Vivian. I don't even have anyone to come and babysit while I work. And I can't get rid of him. Don't look at me like that. I can't, that's all. I think it would be worse then than it is now. Vivian walked through the kitchen, looked in the spice jars and said, "If your creep doesn't show up, you can always go home. At least there are all those aunts there who were friends with your grandmother will help you with something. But it's the last resort to go back penniless. You're still a little young. Could you have time to get a job here in St. Petersburg? Ideally officially, of course, with maternity leave and everything." Employers don't like that. When everything becomes clear, they say that a pregnant woman got a job on purpose. But they have their own truth, you have yours. You need to live, and they don't care. But with your profession and no experience, it may not work out that way. So at least you got something. I'll always buy you a meal and feed you. You won't go hungry, that's for sure. If you don't spend your paycheck but save up some money here and come back to your town with a small reserve for the first time. Or maybe you'll be lucky enough to find something decent. Then you'll stay in St. Petersburg as long as you want. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'd do if I were you. A job first, and then we'll see. Maggie thought that's what she'd do. She just did. Half an hour later, her cell phone rang. "Maggie, hi. Listen, I'm not going to tell you over the phone, but I think I have something for you," said Rita from Orchid. Here's what the edited text might look like. Rose reported, "Our Richard wants to see you. He promised to be at the salon by about 3 p.m., so you better hurry up too." "Should I bring my papers?" Maggie asked. "Yes, I doubt he'll look at your papers right away," Rose said. "Well, take your passport just in case, and don't pretend to be a foreigner, like a Czech. It's not like I have any idea what he's going to get in his head from our unpredictable boss." Unpredictable. That's not very reassuring, Maggie thought. But there was no choice. Good thing she looked good that day. Maggie washed her hair, did her makeup thoroughly, dressed in one of her newest casual dresses, and even wore heeled sandals, even though she usually wore more comfortable shoes. By 3 o'clock, she was at the salon. The director had to wait another half hour. Maggie was having coffee with Rose and one of the clients from the next door, a bright, fresh-faced, red-haired, cheerful lady. "The bosses aren't late, the bosses are late, girls," she announced, making funny grimaces. She entertained Maggie and Rose with amusing stories. It wasn't boring at all. But when the principal did arrive, the cheerful client quickly said goodbye and left. Margaret, instead of gossiping, would have cleaned the place up for once. I'm not talking about superficial cleaning. I'm talking about real cleanliness. I can't believe you don't have time. "I can tell from the receipts that I have time," he said instead of greeting, without anger, with lazy irritation. Richard was a thick, stocky, middle-aged man in a brightly colored Hawaiian shirt that was a little tight around the stomach. "Richard, have a cheerful outlook on life. Is something wrong?" "Just yesterday I was your smarty pants girl," Rose said with a smile. "Is this the girl you were telling me about?" He changed the subject. "Yes, that's Maggie, a certified hairdresser with diplomas, certificates. Let's give it a shot. This girl really needs a job. She's just dying for a job. She's serious, she won't ask for time off. Right, Maggie?" Yes, Maggie confirmed, trying to be convincing. Here's what the edited text might look like. "Hello, please take me on probation," Richard said. Maggie's girlfriend brown-eyed. "I'm blonde," he hummed, giving Maggie a friendly, quick glance. "But the thing is, I don't need another hairdresser. I'd also try to get an experienced one and see if she's any better than these. I'm not messing with you." "Why did you ask me to come?" Maggie asked, confused. "Rose was very complimentary about you. I wanted to see if you'd be a good fit. I have a restaurant besides this place. I need another waitress now, a pretty and smart one." "Is it urgent?" "I mean, people are hiring," Maggie said. "I don't have much time, and I don't really want to waste time. If it suits you, you'll make money. The tips are pretty good over the summer, as far as I know. We'll see in the fall. I'll tell you right away, I won't make it official. It's not profitable for me. I have a lot of such establishments. In the fall, there will be fewer tourists, Maybe we'll have to fire half of them. It's a seasonal job, as usual. I'm on my way there right now. I can take you with me. See if you like it. Then we can talk about shift pay. Yeah, thanks for the offer. Sure, I'll go. Maggie agreed right away. What's the point of acting out in a situation like this? How long would she look for a job in her specialty before her position really became apparent? Would she ever find one? She could end up with nothing. At least there's a chance. Rose nodded at her behind Richard's back and waved her hand affirmatively. It's the right thing to do. And before Maggie knew it, she was already working in Violet for the 4th week. Yes, that was the name Richard and his partner Pete had. The restaurant was in the same semi-basement as the Orchid, only larger. There was 1 cook and an assistant and 2 waitresses per shift. One of the girls had recently graduated from university and decided to change the job she'd held on to while she was a student. Maggie was hired in her place. The restaurant was quite cozy, frequented, inexpensive, and the place was quite lively. The food was good. Another plus at work, they fed, of course not the same as the clients, simpler and cheaper. Pasta or potatoes with a meat portion, wieners or a chicken leg. At first Maggie was very happy, no need to spend on food on weekdays, again saving money. But more and more often there were days when every trip to the kitchen for an order became a feat for her. The mere smell of food made her nauseous. Not even the most appetizing dish from the banquet menu, let alone a company meal. Maggie worked shifts 2 days a week from 11 to 11 p.m. And you'd never guess in the morning how the shift would go. You'd fly from morning till night and chew on cabbage, carrots, and apples all day. Or barely crawl, holding onto the wall and trying not to look at the food, coming to the kitchen for an order. The doctor at the women's clinic, where Maggie registered for temporary registration, explained she has toxicosis. It happens a lot, but it's not a big deal. It should pass soon. I wish it would go away soon, Maggie thought. When the cook Vince is on shift, she's more relaxed. He doesn't notice anything, like all the guys. Thinking it's not a big deal, the girl didn't sleep well. But Sarah, or Sarah Lindsay as she called herself, looked at her suspiciously, as if she'd guessed it all long ago. Maggie tried not to think about it, remembering her friend Vivian's admonition. You need to take care of your nerves now, or you'll have a lot of trouble later with a nervous child. It's just a job. You do it and you go. You don't care what anyone thinks. Vivian herself knew how to do that. She'd recently gotten out of maternity leave, returned to her accounting department, and talked about her boring boss with a laugh, no hard feelings. Maybe it was a good thing the heat was a rarity in New York that summer. It was hard to bear with the humidity here. Or was it just Maggie now? But one day on the shift it got unbearable. Nothing. It would soon be over. She ran into the locker room, behind which was the restroom, and tore off the top 2 buttons of her white work blouse to keep it from getting dirty. As she was about to get up and go to the gym, she heard behind her. You don't make any sudden movements, girl. There are only 2 tables. Natalie can handle it without you. Let's make some peppermint tea. It helps. I've got a lot of mint growing in my garden. I'll give it to you at home if you want it. Ginger tea helps with that too, and you should eat it. You should eat more often and sleep longer. Sarah looked at Maggie without laughing, but also without pity, with calm understanding and sympathy. For some reason Maggie felt not scared, but much relieved that she had punctured herself after all. In 10 minutes in the kitchen, while she drank mint tea, she told Sarah Lindsay her whole story. The usual story, she said. Svet, are you going to take the groceries? Pete asked behind her back. Ah, hello, Svetlana Borisovna. Sarah Lindsay in turn asked in a deliberately mocking tone. Maggie even forgot that she felt sick and realized with sober horror that Pete could have heard their conversation. This companion of Richard's, young, thin, and noiseless, frightened her very much for some reason. Unpleasant, always coming unheard. Such was his gait. With cooks still sometimes greets, even something else will say. And waitresses in general about the furniture, even a word never dignifies never. Maggie jumped up at his discovery and happily clung to the elbow of Natalie, who had appeared in the kitchen. Oh, Natash, let's go for a second. Come on, what did you get out of Natalie? As soon as they were out of the door, you'd think a little bit in the kitchen. There's not a full house in the auditorium. That Pitlick's probably the main one, and he's just acting like it. In the evening, Richard arrived in another Hawaiian shirt, and with a particularly heavy smell of booze for Maggie. He called Maggie. In the room, accountant kitchen, office of the incoming accountant calculator. Examined the girl squeamishly and tiredly held out an envelope. Your payment for the month. I check everything honestly. You don't work anymore, he said. Why? Maggie asked with just her lips. How insolent modern girls are, especially from the suburbs like you. What makes you think you have the right to lie and set someone up when you've been stupid enough to get pregnant? Something will happen to you at work, and you will go to some labor inspectorate. You will tell how the bastard director did not register you for work, exploited you, and you will demand maternity money. I will not scold you and scare you, so that you do not immediately faint to me. I'm just asking you nicely for now, be quiet, and don't try to pull something like that. He was almost friendly, without anger. A smooth, lazy voice. Maggie had a lot of things she wanted to say, but she kept quiet. She wanted to throw his money at him, but she took the envelope silently. It would come in handy. It wasn't even for her. Let's really report the bastard, Vivian suggested. You want me to report him for poisoning at his diner? Yeah, they'd just fire Sarah, Lena, or Vince. Maggie waved her head. Yeah, that's a no-go. Oh, we'll get the IRS on him. I'll tell them they didn't give him a check twice for service, or the health department, or the fire department. I mean, what's the one thing he can't get enough of? Vivian, I won't feel better if he feels worse, Maggie admitted. I would, honestly, said Vivian. They wouldn't let her rest in her own apartment after work, Kieran's husband muttered. They're all intrigue. Kieran couldn't tell whether he was joking or serious. The next day, Maggie slept most of the day. She woke twice, drank strong tea in the kitchen, and went back to bed. Nothing wanted to do, nothing to think about. It was as if a dark curtain had fallen over her eyes. In the evening, Vivian rang the doorbell. Come to our place. Oh, come on, Kieran will be nagging you and me. He's calling you himself. He wants to tell you something. He didn't send it through me, Vivian announced. Kieran was in the kitchen eating soup from a deep bowl. Maggie, I found out something for you. Maybe it'll be good for you. My buddy Eugene finishing. He just did a remodel on a private house in the suburbs for a grandfather. It's a nice house, but he lives alone. He's taken a liking to his colleague. He sees that he's a normal, honest guy, and shared that he would rent a room to a woman, if for the usual household help and to be his companion, so even for free. You know, for errands and conversation. That's the deal. A favor for a favor. His living conditions are very good. He's not picky about cleaning and cooking. He told me so himself. Maybe he's crazy. Maggie interrupted incredulously. Eugene says exactly normal, the right grandfather. Just alone and with money. He says he can always get it through an agency, but he doesn't trust them very much. That's why he's asking everyone he knows to recommend him. I thought of you right away. Lying again? Maggie asked tiredly. Suddenly a good man, he expects a quiet old age. And suddenly I'm having a baby, and if I find a job again, how will I have time to do his errands? Then you'll have to pay for the room like you're supposed to. And listen, Maggie, don't confuse me. I'm not Sherlock Holmes. I'm a slow thinker. Come on. And Eugene will tell him honestly that this is your situation. It's probably the right thing to do. Let him decide for himself. Yes or no? Maggie nodded. Even Kieran wanted to help her. She'd thought he hated her for hanging around their house. That didn't make sense. I don't think this is going to work. But you have to say thank you and pretend you're hopeful. So she did. Kieran went to his Eugene. Vivian exhaled noisily and suggested, let's have some cherry pie. We'll sit up for the night. Vivian suggested, if you're really hungry, we could do it once. What do you think, Maggie? Maybe something good could come out of this. Go and see it. You've got nothing to lose. Just take a good look at the landlord. He's a cunning old man. Instead of hiring a housekeeper for a salary, he's looking for a tenant who'll do the same duties for a room. Don't be shy, just ask directly what exactly you have to do. Maybe it's a lot of work. What? It's easier to rent a room for money than to do it all every day. Honestly, I couldn't do it. Sometimes I'm ready to throw something heavy at my chief accountant for her nagging. And there's a million reasons for nagging. But it's still worth a look. On his first day off, Kieran took Maggie to meet the grandfather who rented out the room. According to him, the grandfather was not confused by Maggie's story. He didn't even ask anything. Vivian had planned to contact her husband and friend, thinking of a good excuse to go out with the child in the country. But the baby was sick, feverish and cranky, and they didn't have time for a walk. For some reason, Maggie imagined a large wooden house in a clearing like merchant estates from movies about old life. But the house turned out to be brick and faced with stone without any curlicues, but very stylish and beautiful. It was surrounded by a small garden, a few apple and cherry trees without a trace of beds and flower beds. This through the fence could be seen at once. The fence was not a blank brick wall, but a wrought metal one. The elegant gate was ajar, but Kieran was too shy to enter and called on his cell phone. "Greg, this is Kieran from Eugene. I brought Maggie's girl to see your room." "Ah, good, let's go inside, Maggie." As they walked along the stone-paved path toward the house, the front door opened, and the owner himself appeared, holding a large and very shaggy white dog by the collar. From under his bangs he was scrutinizing Maggie and Kieran. "This is Archie. He's peaceful. As long as he doesn't attack us," Master said. Master continued. "So don't be afraid of him for a minute if you're not going to attack him. And I'm Greg." One had to look closely at his face to realize that the host was well into his 70s, covered with a grid of wrinkles where deep and sharp, where thinner and smaller. His gaze was quick and sharp, not senile, but it was softened by the rays of wrinkles near his eyes. "Not mean," Maggie breathed out quietly. And if you didn't look at his face, you'd never think he was an old man. He had the posture of a middle-aged man with a gaunt figure and no hint of decrepitude. Completely graying silver hair was cut very short, a neat beard. Greg invited them into the house. So respectable on the outside, the house turned out to be cozy, but a little unusual on the inside. Of course, it was obvious from the many signs that a woman's hand had not been here for a long time, although the owner obviously keeps order. But the main thing was that the house was as if several different eras had come together. So different was the furniture, even the bedspreads and curtains. In the spacious hallway on the first floor XXI century, and in the living room as if the 19th. Even Maggie, who knew a little about antiques, could tell that the furniture was antique. She faltered, "I guess it's rude to look at everything so closely." Kieran took a seat on the edge of the guest sofa at his host's suggestion and kept modestly quiet. "I suppose you want to see the room at once, Maggie?" Greg asked. "Have you already decided that I'm the right person for you?" Maggie was surprised and confused. "Have you decided that I'm not the right person for you?" The landlord laughed. "Don't be so quick to judge. Let's see the room. It's right here on the first floor. I myself live on the second floor. There's an office and a bedroom. The rest of the space is abandoned. It's just a bunch of old archives. I'm sorting it out, but it's a little light. If you'd like to keep me company, I'd really appreciate it. Of course, if you're interested." Here's how it went down. Greg opened the light beige silent door. "This is the room. Come in, Maggie." A square room, the window looked out into a cozy corner of the garden. It seemed very warm and cozy, though the only furniture was an old chest of drawers, a small table with a mirror, and a bed. "We'll find a closet for dresses," said the owner. "Curtains. If you don't like them, change them. The main thing is not to tear down the load-bearing walls, and the rest is negotiable, solvable." Maggie remembered the most important thing. "Greg, I like the room. You just tell me all your conditions in detail at once. You told Eugene that you're renting the place out for household help, and I'd like to know what my duties will be. I'm conscientious. But you know I'm having some difficulties." "What a businesslike girl you are," smiled the owner. "Your difficulties, as you put it, do not interfere with me. Maybe it will sound strange what I will say, but try to understand. I know you have no one. I don't have anyone either. I could hire a pro housekeeper and but I don't want an uncomfortable stranger's professional servant person in the house anymore. I don't have a need for the house to be perfectly cleaned, like for a magazine, and to be serviced like a luxury hotel. I need a live-in person in the house. I like you a lot, and I don't like all people. Household chores without the fanaticism. The same things you'd do if I were your dad or your grandfather living under the same roof. A little bit at a time, depending on your mood. Just so you're sure this isn't charity. This kind of work is worth about the price of a house. If you help with the archives, that would be the most wonderful thing. I'll pay you like a secretary for that. Maggie had imagined her conversation with the landlord differently, and she had imagined him differently while she was on her way here. It seems suspicious that things are working out so well. All right, she'll probably find out the pitfalls later. Here's the edited text. Greg, when can we move into the room? Maggie asked. If your friend Kieran will drive up and down to get your things, you can go today, Greg said. I'll give you some money to stop by and buy us dinner and a housewarming party. Yes, I'll make dinner, Maggie promised. Let's go ask Kieran. It turned out that archives were not dusty and boring papers that made me sleepy. Documents are a very interesting thing, like reading a screenplay. Only it was all real. Especially the diaries. They were alive, like enchanted narrow books. When there were no computers and not everyone had a typewriter, people simply wrote down their thoughts with a pen on paper, and even earlier, they transcribed them into ordinary school notebooks, or beautiful thick volumes that contained whole lives. And people had enough time for that, despite the fact that there were almost no household appliances, and life itself was no easier than it is now. As Greg said, life had simplified and lost a lot. No, there's a lot of good things now, but the old good things had better stay. It was very interesting with him in general. Vivian was worried that Maggie was bored out there on the outback with her old grandfather and called for her to come and visit them more often on weekends. Maggie was happy to come, and she took a couple of walks around New York with little Greg, and then she was just as happy to come back. Oh, all right, my bunnies, I've got to go home, she said last Saturday, surprised at herself. With Vivian, she already thought of this house and the room in it as her real home, the one she had lived in long ago, and it was as if her grandmother's pictures had always hung on that wall opposite her bed. Where did Greg put them? Not picking on you, Grandpa? Vivian asked. About the variety on the menu or anything else? Not putting things in the wrong place, not neat enough or lazy? What kind of complaints can grandfathers have? Maggie laughed. Probably like my Kieran, only twice as much because of his age. To be honest, it's hard for me to imagine Greg as a picky old man, laughed Maggie. As it happens, I don't do anything heavy at all. But I do the same basic things I did when I lived with my grandmother. Dinner, simple cleaning, and Greg takes away my cleaning supplies. If you imagine I should be tired by now. And Greg always spoils me with goodies, she continued. He says he bought it for himself, but he barely touches it. Vivian, he's not a typical grandfather. There was a story, Maggie said. There lived a regular old Soviet professor, invented various innovations for the Soviet industry and for the military. And he had two favorite students, both of whom had been working with him for many years, and shortly before the collapse of the Soviet Union. He started some serious project and hoped very much to advance it. One of his students worked with him on the technical part of the project, and the other one, more persuasive and dodgy, ran through all sorts of instances to get funding, or some permits. For me, these technical scientific works are just a dark forest, Maggie admitted. I only realized one thing about them: they are very long, and the result is not always as you expect. And while these companions were working, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, and the funding ran out. Soon there would be nothing to travel on. It was unclear who would pay for the work in general, even if from home all the valuable things in the pawn shop. And when everything was ready, one of the student companions disappeared. The one who was a punching bag, I guessed. Yeah, that's what happened, Maggie nodded. Took all the developments with him and took off. That's the way it was going. He went to the West, patented his invention, provided for himself and his children for life. And these two honest martyrs of science professors almost had a stroke. He was ill for a long time, barely survived, and when he got back on his feet, his wife also took him to the States, persuaded him. She had a close relative living there and married very successfully. and the second student stayed here in New York. Here is the edited continuation of the text. At first he thought he'd go to sleep, Maggie continued, and then somehow it all worked out. Talent, he does find a loophole. He met the right person from the New Russians, but very smart. He began to work for this man, a whole production he thought up and earned good money back in the 90s, and then also received an inheritance from the States. It turns out that his favorite friend, a professor, still had time to work there but for himself, said Maggie. And the professor had no children. He wrote such a will, half of the property to his wife, half to his student and colleague Greg, where I live. This old archive we're going through right now is the professor, she explained. Greg dragged it everywhere with him, since it was left to him, and his last name. The antique furniture was left to him. The professor and his wife could have sold it before they left. It's not cheap. But the professor wanted to leave at least something valuable as a memento of himself to his student. He felt he'd let him down with his earnings and recognition. And when Greg bought the house, he moved everything there. And now he lives surrounded by those memories, Maggie continued. And the archive wants to dismantle and hand over some of his favorites, as if he owed it to his teacher, so that someone here would remember him. That's the life of people, Vivian waved her head. Even intelligence isn't a guarantee that you'll live a problem-free life. Listen, why is your Greg alone, if there are no heirs around such a wealthy grandfather? So you're right. He's got no one. There's something about him. Unless some auntie's got her hands on him. Vivian, he doesn't mention that at all. I don't ask, said Maggie. Maybe if he asked me something personal, I would. But he doesn't ask me either. I think he's embarrassed. He's been brought up to mind his own business. It's complicated with intellectuals, Vivian confirmed with a knowing look, as if she talked to professors every day. Maybe on the contrary, it's easier to live like that, if you follow all these rules? Vivian thought aloud. I won't make predictions, so as not to jinx it, but so far you seem to be lucky. You even look prettier, even though you're digging through dusty archives. Yeah, I looked like you when I moved in, didn't I? Maggie agreed. Look, I'm not an intellectual, I'll ask you. Have you heard from Artem? Vivian, I would have told you first. I don't have anyone in New York besides you, Bones, and Greg. Greg rarely forgot anything, and now, when he volunteered to help Maggie peel apples for jam, it turned out that he forgot his glasses in the office, probably left them on the keyboard of his laptop. I'll be right there. Let me run in myself. I want to run up the stairs, Maggie said. She had only been in the office a few times. It was Greg's diocese. As he put it, I'm the master and manager here. Occasionally he'd do a little rearranging the books on the shelves or some figurines. Now on his antique bureau desk next to his laptop, besides his glasses, a chessboard with bone chess and a small photograph in a thin wooden frame had been left behind. Maggie hadn't noticed any photos in the office before, at least not in prominent places. In the black and white amateur photo, a little girl with 2 ponytails on top of her head is lying on the sand in a swath of sea surf, laughing and hugging a large striped bouncy ball. Maggie remembered every detail of that photo very well. She had one just like it in her backpack, in the same folder with her passport, diploma, and the few expensive photos. Greg, where did you get that photo of the girl at sea? Maggie asked, forgetting her embarrassment as she went down to the kitchen and handed the landlord her glasses. That's the picture I took. I was into photography, Greg replied, looking anxiously into Maggie's face, as if listening to her strange mood. That's my daughter, Nellie. Maggie looked at the picture of little Nellie hugging a large bouncy ball, and her voice trembled slightly. I carry a picture like that with me. It came here with me too. That's my mom, Nellie. Greg nodded sadly. Yes, Nellie Vitalievna was my wife. A good memory is far from always a blessing. She's a curse sometimes. Memories came flooding back. The beautiful Angela, whom he had adored until their last day together, had suddenly become a complete stranger. She looked even more beautiful, but it was a manicured, magazine beauty that was scary to touch. I don't want the child to flip back and forth, Angela said in her gentle voice. It will be easier for her to forget you and get used to a new father. Vitaly takes good care of her and wants me to call him Daddy. She'll have everything you could never give her. Do you know how much Nellie loves me? Greg asked painfully. You dared such a despicable fiction to make a child feel betrayed by her own father. She had already stopped caring. Children forget things quickly, Angela replied. When she's an adult, she'll understand me as a woman. If you come up with the idea of showing up, it will only be worse for her. Greg sighed. Yes, you've studied me pretty well. I won't tell my daughter that her mother easily denigrated her father. At least let her mom stay good to her. Thank you, Maggie said. I knew you'd understand, Greg. I'm not filing for child support. I know how hard this is for you. Thank you, he chuckled through gritted teeth. He turned and walked away. I didn't know where, just away. He didn't recognize anything else, and he'd never looked for anyone. He himself could no longer answer who he was protecting, more his daughter or himself, and he made a terrible mistake. Had he found his daughter in time, there would have been someone to support her when her mother had turned her away because his Nellie had chosen an unfavorable husband. And Maggie's granddaughter would have had someone to support her and his son-in-law's sainted mother. Maybe Maggie's only real grandmother would still be alive if her heart had paid for serious treatment. But history does not bear the subjunctive mood. As his teacher and colleague used to say, now you have to move on and live a long time, because soon there will be another tenant in the house who will have to be taken care of for a long time until he can take care of himself. And to live long, easy and pleasant when you have someone to live for. Vivian's voice was a little strained, and she didn't call in the evening as usual, but on her lunch hour. Maggie, would you mind if I came straight over after work today? Yeah, nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. Just in the mood to see you and chat. There's some little things I need to tell you. Yes, come over, of course, Maggie said. Especially since Grandpa's going to a class reunion at the Institute, and he's worried about how we're going to be alone for so long. What if we need something in his absence, and he's not here? I'll at least reassure him that we won't miss him. Oh, great. Considering all the traffic, I'll be at your place by 8 p.m., Vivian promised. Maggie sent her grandfather a wet asphalt suit for the weekend, tied his tie, approved his gentlemanly image, and escorted him to the meeting. He waved a long time after the cab. Back at the house, Maggie put on her cash and went out into the garden with it. In the far sunny corner under the apple trees, unnoticeable from the road, they had a real nest. Grandfather had hung a baby cocoon hammock there for Nellie. It seemed to Maggie that her daughter loved to lie there and watch the sun bunnies playing in the apple leaves. She hummed softly in her own language. And then she would fall asleep and sleep soundly. Whatever sounds came from the road, the clever dog Archie, who knew not to bark now, sat nearby and just breathed noisily. There, too, at arm's length, stood a small, elegant garden table and 2 armchairs. Grandfather and Maggie had been sitting there for a month, since the middle of May, at 12 o'clock, rocking Nellie and listening to her hum. She's going to have a beautiful voice, Grandpa laughed in a whisper, raising his index finger to the sky. And not for nothing did she go to the opera and operetta. When in October in the city and in nature became somehow, especially Petersburg, without shelter and dreary, Grandpa Greg came up with an entertainment for Maggie. These are the theaters you like, he asked. Maggie didn't know which one she liked, or if she liked them at all. I've never been to one before, she said shyly. In our town there was nothing but the House of Culture. And here I didn't have time. Sometimes they brought some performances to the House of Culture, but I was never particularly interested in it. I see. What would be interesting? Did not lag behind Grandfather. I like music, Maggie admitted. Not electronic music for disco, but beautiful music, which is good for thinking or remembering something. And Grandpa took a season ticket to the Mariinsky Theater, and he so mesmerized Maggie that Grandfather gladly renamed it for himself in the Mariinsky, and she felt the baby's movements there for the first time. The ultrasound showed it was a girl. Maggie knew for sure. A girl listens to music, swoons along with it during opera arias and dances to the front. Can you tell I'm making this up? Maggie used to say to her grandfather. But Nellie liked Queen of Spades best of all. He looked strangely and was silent for about 5 minutes, as if he were talking to himself, but he couldn't say it aloud. He only glared. Maggie realized only then that she had not told him how she had decided to name her girl at once, as she had already called her. Nellie was born in February, on a windy, blizzardy night. Balloons and flowers greeted them from the maternity hospital by three people: Grandpa, Vivian, and Kieran. Kieran drove them home, and it wasn't until their friends had left after a small buffet that Grandpa Greg sat down across from Maggie and asked, "Maybe you should let Nellie's father know she was born after all? What do you think?" "Grandpa, you haven't asked anything about him at all for so long. I thought you never would. You don't want to know anything about him?" "I just saw that you didn't want to talk about him. It's a day like this. Maybe you'll see things differently now." "The trouble with people like you is that you judge others by your own judgment," said Maggie. "You're right in some ways, but don't forget that I'm old. I've learned a few things and gotten over my naivete. Just bring me up to speed, at least briefly, while our girl is asleep." And Maggie did. To her immortal surprise, it was not at all hard for her to tell her grandfather about Archie and how easily he'd walked away from her, as if retelling a movie or a novel. It didn't have the slightest relevance to her anymore. She has a different life with other people in charge. Grandpa agreed with Maggie. Everyone who should know about Nellie's birth had already been notified. It turned out that it only seemed to Maggie that the recent past had evaporated completely. Vivian tiptoed over, looked at the sleeping Nellie, and said, sitting down on the edge of the chair, "Maggie, you'll have to forgive me in advance, please. I'm a fool to admit it." "Don't scare me with your preambles," Maggie said. She had almost no doubts about what she was going to talk about. "We had a big corporate retreat at work, the company's 20th anniversary. Shashliks in the evening scattered on the bumps to talk. Well, we have a purely female company gathered on the open veranda of all ages from 30 to 55, and there was the usual conversation about how hard it is to raise a child alone, that say it is better not to dare. In general, it's always poverty and problems. And somehow everyone fell into such pessimism, strange for a corporate party, that I wanted to tell something good. I mean, it's not always that bad. So I told Maggie the story of how she found her grandfather. I didn't even give her name, but I told them she was my friend. The girls were surprised, happy for her and her daughter, and cheered up. You'd think that would be the end of it. No way. A day later, Sunday, the doorbell rings. Maggie's ex is on the doorstep, looking anxiously for her. I let him in. Of course, I'm not being rude. Or rather, I was just confused by surprise and forgot I should have been harsh. "This is a phenomenon," I said. Here he began to me, obviously according to the prepared scenario, say, he realizes that I consider him a scoundrel, and he fully agrees. He is a scoundrel, but only now he has realized everything, and other things in the same vein. Probably watched a couple shows as a guide. I sit there nodding, pretending to be touched by his remorse, and he sings to me that he would have apologized to Maggie a long time ago if she hadn't changed her phone number and location. I lost track of her, you see. "I've only just decided to ask you now. I was so ashamed to show up," he said. I was even too lazy to ask him tricky questions. I was so disgusted. He thinks I'm a fool. No, I do not claim to be a smart woman, but not to this extent. I don't know how to get rid of him. As luck would have it, Kieran was out fishing with Eugene. If only it were that easy. Archie started begging me. "Give me an address, at least give me a phone number." So I blurted it out. "I've got my own life and my own business. I don't have time to deal with other people's problems. We haven't talked to each other since we moved away. We were just roommates. Maybe Maggie even went home. Go back to your town if that's what you want." He didn't believe me for a second. "Don't lie to me, kid. I ain't done nothing wrong to you," he started. He's angry and about to threaten me, even though it's not good for him. I was lucky the fishing trip didn't work out and Kieran came home early. So Kieran kicked him out, talked to him in the street once, made him promise not to come to us. Vivian paused, took a big sip of her cooled coffee, stroked Olaf's arm, and without waiting for Maggie to comment, continued. "I'm just convinced, I was convinced from the beginning, that his appearance had something to do with my chatter. And he heard about you at the corporate party, that you're doing well, so he decided to try his luck and get a big piece of the action. It seems like a big city. But in such cases you realize that Kokorin is small. It turns out that someone always sees something, hears something, and passes it on to the wrong person. And I'm an accountant. I'm close to the personnel department. I'm friends with our personnel officer, Bella. I told her the situation, asked her to look in the profiles where the husbands of those girls who were sitting with us in the company, and listened to my story. We got in, looked, it didn't take long. Only 7 girls were married. And my hunch was right. Kathy in sales has Omega Lux service on her husband's profile, just like your Archie. You said the name, and I remember things like that. Remember when we were laughing? Why is there a C in Omega Luxury? And then it turned out that it's a designation of the Viborg district, and there are other Omegas. Here is the most likely version. That Archie is a buddy of Kathy's husband, and she told the story from the corporate party in front of him. And this goose, of course, recognized himself and you. It's too much of a match. Didn't I mention you were my roommate the other day? Maggie, I'm sorry, and be aware that he might show up, Vivian warned. Wow, Vivian, you're really something. Maggie smiled, trying to make her smile as serene as possible. You've made such a detective out of nothing, even going into the personnel records. It's not your fault. You couldn't have foreseen anything, you just told me in the mood. I've always loved hearing other girls' stories, too. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. If you're not gossiping, not saying mean things behind your back, but just talking about a person, thank you for not being mad at me. I would understand if you scolded me. Are you going to do anything about it? What do you mean? Maggie didn't understand. Stuff my stuff in a suitcase and run off somewhere? No one came to see me. Even if Archie somehow found out where I lived, there was no way he'd come here. Unless you said it was a threesome. Maybe he's picturing a mansion with columns, an alarm system, a panic button, and a couple of grim bodyguards. I didn't mention that, Vivian exhaled with relief. Oh, I even said that you have a gorgeous dog, a South Russian sheepdog. By the way, this breed is considered unpredictable and aggressive. Sorry, Olaf. By the way, you do have an alarm system, don't you? Richard returned home lively, happy to see old friends. He joked, retold stories of his classmates, sent greetings from them to his granddaughter and great-granddaughter, and announced that he had missed them. Maggie didn't tell him about Vivian's accident. It wasn't right to worry if he was the only one who would worry about her and Sarah. He needed to be taken care of, too, and there was no one else to do that but her. Sure, she was scared at first, but only a little, and at the very first moment. It's clear that Archie is not a villain, but an ordinary selfish guy. Absolutely nothing to be afraid of. Maggie will think of something if he shows up. A month later, Maggie had almost forgotten Vivian's warning. She had no time to think about unpleasant things. Her daughter Sarah was growing up. She was already sitting up in her crib, trying to sit up even in the soft cocoon chair. When she saw Olaf, she was happy and stretched her arms to him, trying to run them into his shaggy hair. Don't worry, Richard said reassuringly. Olaf understands perfectly well that it's a puppy. Vivian came almost every weekend with her granddaughter and sometimes with Kieran. But Maggie also wanted to suddenly go to Peter. Grandpa was supportive. And I still wonder how you are still not bored. At your age, solitude is usually hard to bear. The baby's over 6 months old. It's time you got out into the world. Go out with Vivian, even if it's just a carefree summer cafe. And Mommy needs to rest too. Why don't you find the milk and I'll do it without you? Fine and feed. Good girl, praised Richard. I am amazed at your knowledge in different areas. What did you think? I secretly read literature about children and control the process of growing and education. Grandpa grinned. So Maggie went to Vivian's. They did not sit in an outdoor cafe and walk together through the zoo, but still had a great time. They said they'd be coming here with Sarah very soon, showing her bigger animals than Olaf. She'd definitely be interested. They talked about how, when Sarah gets a little older, Maggie is going to open a little beauty parlor. Grandpa wants to help her start a business she likes, and it would just be great if Vivian would agree to do the bookkeeping. They did 3 laps around the zoo. Olaf didn't want to leave. When we managed to get him out, we bought ice cream and sat down with him on a bench in Alexander Park. Maggie took a bite of ice cream with pleasure and heard a half-forgotten familiar voice from the side. Maggie Schenk. She shuddered. It seemed to her that Vivian had, too. Olaf was running around the flower bed, eating ice cream on the run. Archie stepped out of the mottled shade of a tree and stood in front of them. Maggie Schenk. "Hello, Maggie," he said to her. "We have to go," Vivian said. "We're late, let's go." "Wait for me just a little while," Maggie heard her own carefree voice. "I'm interested." "It won't take long. I'm listening." The last words were meant for Archie. "Where's our daughter?" he asked, making a worried face. "We don't have anything ours," Maggie Reshetniak explained amicably. "I'm sorry if you can. I need you and your daughter. It just took me a long time to realize it. I'd do anything for you. If you'll let me try to start over. Vivian told you I was looking for you." Olaf ran around the flower bed, eating ice cream on the run. Archie stepped out of the mottled shade of a tree and stood in front of them. Maria Schenk. "Hello, Marina," he said to her. "We have to go," Vivian rushed over. "We're late, let's go." "Wait for me literally just a little bit." Maggie heard her own carefree voice. "I'm interested. It won't take long. I'm listening." The last words were meant for Archie. "Where's our daughter?" he asked, making a worried face. "We don't have anything ours," Maggie Reshetniak explained amicably. "I'm sorry, if you can. I need you and your daughter. It just took me a long time to realize it. I'd do anything for you. If you'll let me try to start over. Vivian told you I was looking for you." Vivian stood aside by the flower bed, listened. Olaf didn't even pull her back, jumping around. Maggie grinned slightly, wrinkled her nose. "Very, very theatrical. I have nothing to forgive you. It's been and gone. Then it had to be. Thanks for the daughter. She's beautiful. How did it happen?" "Deep," said Archie with reproach and admiration at the same time. "You look just Hollywood something else. Or it's really time for different." "I don't hold a grudge against you, Archie. And I'm not filing for alimony. Don't worry. You'll keep all your savings," Maggie continued in the same peaceful tone. "Maggie, don't do this to me. You can't have forgotten everything so quickly. I know you. It wouldn't have been you. People don't change that fast. And we have a daughter, and you won't even let me look at her. I know you found your grandfather, but that's not the father. I'm not giving up until you give me a chance." Now he's going to play the macho man who decided to fight for his love. Maggie rose from the bench, walked slowly around Archie, stroked his shoulder lightly, made sure he took it as a good sign, and said in the same secure, peaceful and calm voice, "People change. That's how quickly people change when circumstances force them to. I know you're aware of my financial changes, so you're under no illusions. I'm glad I wasn't married to you at the time of my grandfather's arrival. You can find a much better option with an inheritance, even with a child. One more piece of advice. If you decide to look for me or my daughter, in any way to let me know about myself, you know who, what, and how in the 90s earned a living, with whom you had to communicate. My grandfather, and now I have the appropriate connections. My grandfather owes a lot to the influential Mr. Smith, if that name means anything to you. A man like that doesn't withdraw his protection for no reason. They can always be called upon to get rid of unwanted nuisances like you, Archie. It's nothing personal, but consider it a sign of forgiveness." Maggie breathed angrily into his ear and staggered back just in case. She turned and walked across the lawn toward the zoo. "Now it's going to disappear from the horizon," Vivian said. "Listen, I didn't expect this from you. You've really changed, haven't you? I felt that I wasn't alone in the world, and I changed. I can see that. Maggie." "Who's Smith?" "You never told me about him." "Is he the guy your grandfather invented the production lines for?" "I don't even know his name." "Let's go with Jock." "Jock Smith is a vaudeville authority figure for Archie, okay? You just made him up." Passers-by turned around, some irritated, but most smiled. What fun and infectious laughter from those young beautiful girls and the baby. You're covered in ice cream. Up to your ears, running around them so contentedly. Kieran came to pick them up as arranged. "Oh, Barely made it through the traffic, he exhaled. Some uncle jumped up to Eugene and me while we were fishing and began to claim that we had taken his permanent seat. So we squeezed the chair. There's his holy tire, there's his holy tire, there's his rotten rod stands, there's his driftwood. It's the first time in my life, Kieran continued. And you know me, if he'd asked nicely, we'd have left. Even after the rudeness, I said to him, look, you buy this place from the city on the copies, and the reservoir will be yours. In the meantime, behave yourself. You'll be better off with decent people. But you're like Jock Smith's favorite, said Vivian. You already have acquaintances I don't know. That's not my Maggie. Kieran replied that they were giggling for nothing. There's nothing to be amused about. I'll bring Maggie home and tell my grandfather that she has strange acquaintances, ostentatious macho men about whom nothing is known in the house. I've got to be serious and think more about my kids. Rich mother-in-law came to check on her daughter-in-law in the hospital, and upon hearing her words, Maggie McCullough was not happy with her son's choice. Camel, of course, is a grown man, studying, earning money, lives separately, however, in the apartment, inherited by Maggie McCullough, inherited from his mother. But still the woman, taking the photo of her son from the dresser, involuntarily sighed. In the photo, Camel was captured on the day of graduation from school. Cheerful, handsome, statuesque. And how does his suit fit? Oh, it's a sight to behold. Maggie McCullough had the jacket and pants specially ordered in advance from an expensive attire. She wanted Camel to shine at the prom. Well, one of the best students of a prestigious grammar school, and should look accordingly. How the girls looked up to Camel. A mother's heart sang with pride. And Camel was not shy of female society, behaved with girls relaxed, free, not like most of his peers. Camel was always the soul of the company. In childhood, this boy had to be constantly watched with a kind of boiling nature, and not far from trouble. Going everywhere, seeking and finding adventures, and how Maggie trembled over her only child, how she tried to secure the apartment. And still at the age of 3, the boy managed to stick a pizza into the socket, how he was shocked then. His delicate hands were instantly covered with burns. It's a miracle he didn't die. Maggie McCullough cried while waiting for the ambulance, cradled her tearing son, and did not even realize that this is still flowers. Camel subsequently fell many times, either from a tree or from a fence. Once even got a concussion, and dogs bit him in the yard, and on a bicycle he got into an accident. I can't think of everything. He's a good-looking kid. And all because Camel was bored just sitting at home. He was drawn to the outdoors, to friends and adventure. Who did he turn out to be? Maggie McCullough herself has always been a model girl, obeyed her parents, afraid to upset or frighten them. And she chose a spouse to match. Stephen, Camel's father, never had a violent temper either. And Camel, that's what Camel is to them. But Maggie McCullough was proud of her son's bright personality. He always had so many friends, so many admirers. Not some gray mouse, but the man of the house and the soul of the company. From his earliest childhood, Maggie knew that her son was better and smarter than the others. I mean, he could read at the age of 3. And neither mother nor father did not make any special efforts to teach the kid. He figured it out on his own. Camel asked questions: what is written here? What is this letter? And little by little, he learned. Maggie McCullough and Stephen were shocked when their 3-year-old read a sign on a store one day. It came as a surprise. Maybe he just memorized it, questioned the father, eyeing the wee one suspiciously. The parents immediately checked their hunch. But no, little Camel confidently read the names of stops and inscriptions on billboards. A little later, Camel learned to count, and again by himself. It was just the boy's nature, curious, greedy for everything new. Sometimes it turned into dangerous adventures, and sometimes such academic success. Maggie McCullough was incredibly pleased with the child's abilities to the 1st grade. It became clear that Camel has nothing to do in a regular school. The woman made every effort, but still got her son into the most prestigious lyceum in their city. She had to pay someone. But that's okay. Their family was already quite wealthy. When Maggie married Stephen, he was a poor student. But the girl never dreamed of being rich. She herself came from a more than modest family, lived with her mother and father in a 1-room apartment, worked after graduating from technical school as an accountant at the factory. There was a period when all her friends started to get married one by one. One would invite the other to the wedding, then the other. And Maggie was all alone, even though she had quite a nice appearance. I guess she was too strict back then. And modest. So guys preferred to get acquainted with more simple and cheerful girls. From the outside, it seemed that Maggie was quite comfortable alone, but she wasn't. And then there's Stephen. They met at a dance at his university. He approached Maggie only at the end of the evening, and blushing and embarrassed, asked her to dance. At first glance, the girl did not like the stubby guy, but she agreed. So already too long at the wall alone stood. During the dance they talked, got to know each other better, and when the music stopped, Maggie looked at her beau with completely different eyes. Smart, polite, kind, reliable, focused on her studies and career. Maggie even then felt that with such a man will not be lost, and her intuition didn't fail her. They started dating. A year later, Stephen proposed to Maggie. He was still studying at the university at that time, and at the same time worked part-time as an assistant engineer in a construction company. The girl thought and agreed. What's the drag? All her friends were already married. She liked Stephen. Her parents didn't mind. Her mom, on the contrary, was even happier. Her daughter was finally settled. And the son-in-law suited them just fine. A well-mannered and respectful future engineer. As a married couple, the university provided them with a dormitory. A small room, only one bathroom on the whole floor, a shared kitchen. But in a strange way, Maggie even liked this life. She was learning to be a wife and a mistress. She felt like an adult. And Stephen was there for her, reliable, loving. With him, the young wife felt beautiful and charming. He won her compliments, bought her wife some inexpensive gifts. There was simply not enough money for something more serious. Scholarships, salaries, part-time workers, no room to spread out. And then Stephen graduated from university, got a full-time job in the construction bureau, where he worked part-time as a student. The young specialist was immediately noticed and started to be promoted. Career growth had a positive effect on his salary. Soon the couple were able to move into their own apartment. Stephen's work helped him with its purchase. It's a pity we didn't have time to have a child. Stephen jokingly lamented. Then we would have gotten a 2-bedroom. And indeed sad. Unlike her husband, Maggie was seriously upset. Don't worry about it, Stephen put his arm around her shoulders. We'll still have everything and children, and a big apartment. Wait a little. And Stephen kept his promise. Indeed, very soon he learned to provide for their little family fully. And Maggie had never lived so well, even at her parents' house. Now she could buy herself beautiful dresses and shoes in the stores that she had previously avoided because they were so expensive. But they were great. And the couple often dined in restaurants and flew to the sea for vacation. At least once a year they even got their own car. Stephen was already the boss, and the company was actively developing and profits were growing. The persistent, promising specialist was not offended by money. He was valued and respected at work. Happiness overshadowed one thing: no way to get a young child. Stephen did not despair, said, what are years? Everything will still be. We are young, healthy. Why worry? But Maggie was still worried. Her friends' children had already gone to kindergarten, and some of them to school. And she, Maggie, pretended that everything suited her. On tactless questions of relatives and friends answered that they are not yet planning heirs. But the young woman's heart was troubled and aching, and so wanted to become a mom. She and Stephen could give a lot to the baby: a separate room, toys, clothes, entertainment, and most importantly, love and care. It was a shame it had to be like this. The doctors were throwing up their hands. It seems that both spouses were quite healthy. Well, medicine was not as well developed then as it is now. Maggie secretly went to her grandmother's witch doctor. The woman found out about her at work. One of her colleagues assured that her relative was able to become a mother after visiting this old woman. She is a magician, just works miracles, cures everything in the world. They say she can even cure the hopeless. What about you? Of course, Maggie asked for the healer's address. She said her cousin needed to get her baby's warts out, but the woman went to the healer with a very different request. The dark spring smell of dried herbs and wax in the house. A thin old woman with attentive black eyes. I see your misfortune, the landlady said from the doorstep. You can't have a baby. But there's no problem. There's no work for me here. What do you mean? Maggie, who thought she was suffering from some serious illness, was surprised. She couldn't get pregnant. "It happens," the old woman sounded just like Stephen. "Wait, it'll happen." Maggie wasn't ready to hear that. She had traveled almost 2 hours to this village in the hope of getting a cure. The young woman told the old woman about it, almost crying. "Oh, young people," grinned the witch doctor. "All right, here is a dry herb, make tea from it, and drink it every day on an empty stomach for 2 weeks. "Thank you." Maggie was happy. Now she had the cure in her hands, so she hadn't come to this wilderness for nothing. Indeed, only a month after that visit, Maggie realized that she was expecting a child. The joy of the young couple was unprecedented. The woman didn't know what to think. Did the magic tea really help, or did everything happen by itself? But it was unimportant. The main thing was that they would have a baby. Like most women, Maggie McCullough dreamed of a daughter, a little obedient doll, which you can braid pigtails, and which is so nice to dress up in beautiful dresses. But Camel was born a sturdy, screaming baby. The baby is demanding and very active. For the first time seeing the baby, Maggie realized here he is, the main person in her life. She will do everything to make this baby was happy. Stephen at that time almost did not appear at home. He was starting his own business, a very risky step, but the man went for it. And his wife supported him. She was always on the side of her husband and trusted him in all important matters. Quiet and unremarkable young man turned out to be smart, persistent, grasping. He perfectly saw the possibilities and knew what he wanted. Maggie had no doubt her husband will succeed, sooner or later. She would help him in any way she could. It was for their future. And for her son, Camel, too. Stephen could not physically help his wife with the baby, though he wanted to. But the man would come home when the baby was asleep. And sometimes Maggie did too. Well, the woman didn't complain. Caring for the baby gave her joy. And the prospects that Stephen was painting were inspiring. Stephen's business was booming. At first it was a firm for major repairs of buildings, then they engaged in construction. Small scale at first, homestead plots and private houses. Then it got bigger. Stephen managed to enter the big business of building residential high-rise buildings in their city. It was a whole different kind of income. Maggie was even dizzy with how much their lives had changed. They weren't complaining about poverty. As head of the department, Stephen earned quite enough. But after becoming the owner of the company, the man really got rich. The family moved into a beautiful country house with a swimming pool. They had a substantial bank account. Stephen suggested that Maggie quit her job, but she herself did not want to. She worked as chief accountant for her husband's company. She liked to realize that she controlled the financial flows and helped her husband in his business. Everything was just fine. Camel grew up, pleased his parents with successes in studies and sports. The business was developing, bringing profit. The relationship between the spouses was wonderful. They became for each other also partners, support, companions. And then suddenly there was a crisis. And competitors at a difficult moment hustled. So Stephen lost his company. Camel was just finishing school. The man took it hard. Maggie understood her husband. After all, the company was his brainchild, which he nurtured from infancy, made strong and prosperous. And now the company was in the hands of competitors. Maggie wasn't worried about their financial well-being. They had savings, and Stephen would not stay idle with such experience. And so it was. Her husband soon got a job in the same construction company where he had started. He was, of course, promoted to a management position. Not his own business, but it was okay. Even better, in a way calmer. The standard of living was the same. Well, the family didn't have that bank account anymore. It's just a pity, because still the lion's share of the money was spent on business development. So Maggie decided for herself that they have not lost anything and live so well. No need to complain. Meanwhile, Camel finished school and entered Moscow State University on his own, on a budget. The guy chose the faculty of law. He was always like that, determined, self-confident, fearless. Camel did not resemble his father. Stephen at his age was quiet, unassuming, serious. All he did was study. Camel had everything: a gold medal, girls and friends. Active, cheerful, handsome. Maggie McCullough wondered how they could have such a guy. Perfect, just good at everything. Absolutely everything. He got into MSU on his own. People who knew him, of course, didn't believe it, thought that his father had hustled him up and gave him the money. But Camel did it himself. He's smart. From a very young age, he amazed others with his abilities. But his mother's heart ached for her son. How will he be without them, in a foreign big city? The boy was accustomed to live in the family on everything. Maggie constantly looked after him, controlled his movements. How could she not? She's a mother. Camel's got a bit of an adventurous streak in him. No, when he's older, he'll be calmer, of course. But for now, I have to keep an eye on him. He's a sociable boy, so don't let him get into bad company. Camel's been drawn to fun and adventure since he was a boy. Maggie did not want to let her only son Camel go to Moscow alone, though she realized that Moscow State University was a different level from the universities in their city. Come on, don't worry, you'll let him off the grid, Stephen exhorted. He's a smart guy, since he went to such a university on his own. And he's not a little kid. What, do you want to hold his hand till he's old? Remember me, I was even younger when I came here from the village. I went to technical school first, then the institute. I was a teenager. And I didn't disappear. Maggie sighed. Why compare Camel and Stephen? They have very different personalities. And her husband doesn't feel and understand his son as she does her mother. That's why he doesn't worry. Yes, Camel is old enough for his age. Maggie had no doubts about her son's intelligence. But his character, Camel's character, was a cause for concern. Left without parental control, having broken free, Camel could forget about his studies and get into trouble. Young, sociable, cheerful. Excessive freedom will make his head spin, and then to trouble is not far away. But Camel still went to Moscow. Maggie was worried, calling her son every day. He cheerfully reported that everything was great. He was studying, had adapted to lead his own life, was quite happy with his life, and was very happy that he had made such a decision. Mother's heart even calmed down for a while. Things seem to be going well. Camel is doing well. She and Stephen have done it, raised a smart, conscious son, and a handsome one at that. Now it's just a matter of getting the kid married. And that's it. We can exhale. Parental mission accomplished successfully. Once Stephen and Maggie dreamed of a large family, planning 2 or 3 children. Financially, they could afford it. But when Camel was born, Maggie suddenly realized that she did not want to deprive her son of anything. Even if they had enough money to provide a decent future for several children. Maggie realized that attention, love, care, and time devoted to Camel alone could not be bought in any store. No, she reasoned, looking at the then still small child, let Camel be the only one we have. It must be so painful to see your parents have a new baby and forget you. Not at all, objected Stephen, who had grown up in a large family. On the contrary, my siblings and I had fun and warmth together, but Maggie stood her ground, and Stephen didn't argue. He was busy developing his business at the time, and the issue of childbearing did not particularly bother him. And so it turned out that Camel was the only child in the family. Maggie regretted it for the first time when her son jumped out of the nest. Who now to take care of? Who to cook delicious meals, iron shirts, knit warm socks? Stephen, as always, is all about work. And he's not particularly fond of taking care of anyone. He's not used to being taken care of. Camel has become more distant, more mature, more autonomous. He used to call every day with news, or at least readily answered his mother's calls. Now it's okay, bye, I have to go. Conversations between mother and son rarely lasted more than a minute. And then Camel stopped picking up the phone altogether, and communication was practically nil. Maggie missed him, worried, anxious. How was her baby boy in a big distant city? Doesn't someone hurt her son? Camel's voice sounded sad, cold, and alien. Maggie shared her fears with her husband, but he kept dismissing them. He had a checkup, or the commissioning of an object. Stephen lived to work, and he certainly did not work for money. Or rather, not only because of it. Maggie could see that Stephen liked what he was doing. But she herself, Maggie, had no such thing. So she stayed in the office from call to call and home to home. Maggie went to work just to be in the team, among her co-workers. Friends sharing life stories, discussing the news. It was her social life. You can't stay cooped up at home all day. Against the background of problems with children, which colleagues told her about, her situation was just perfect. Someone's son was expelled from university. Someone's daughter got pregnant at 16. Maggie's was perfect. Camel is a smart girl. He himself entered a prestigious university. He studies by himself and copes with household problems. Good for him. Everyone envied Maggie when she talked about her son. Of course, the woman did not share all her worries with her colleagues. They were in a relationship, after all, and Maggie wanted to look better in their eyes. She didn't tell anyone that Camel had become unsociable and withdrawn. The guy answered questions, talked to his parents, but cold called himself just to ask for money. Something was clearly going on in his life. Although Stephen brushed off his spouse's concerns, he just never felt for his son the way she felt for his mother. Leave the boy alone. Stephen was angry. That's why he won't talk to us. He's fed up with your concern. Camel went away from us on purpose to be on his own. Get out of my way. Maggie just sighed. Maybe Stephen's right about something, but Camel's not so independent. Not in every way. Of course, they were still providing for him fully. Life in the capital isn't cheap, but his parents could afford to make their student son's life as comfortable as possible. Rent for an apartment, monthly expenses not a small sum. At Camel's age, Stephen never dreamed of such a thing. As a student, he worked, while Camel could rest and study. The problem was that the boy needed more and more money. His father had set a monthly limit for him, and that amount was many times the average salary in their town. Stephen rightly thought that Camel should have enough money, but this was not the case. Camel repeatedly asked his mother to send him money. He had to pay for a seminar, or the washing machine broke down, or something else. There was always a reason. Don't tell your father, Camel asked. Maggie understood her son. The boy was a little embarrassed that his parents were still supporting him as an adult. Camel wanted to look more independent, more responsible in front of his father. Maggie transferred money from her paycheck to her son and didn't tell Stephen about it. Costin asked for it. The woman was pleased by the fact that she and her son had a secret in common. It brought them closer together. Camel had become very closed and secretive. His son was reluctant to answer questions about his life at that time. Yes, everything is normal. I study. With friends I communicate. Have a rest. Everything is good with me. And your girlfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Mom? I'll take care of it. Okay. At first, Camel still came to his hometown for vacations. Then, around the third year, these visits stopped. All communication was reduced to infrequent and uninformative phone calls. Maggie was worried. All the more so because she was almost certain that her son was in trouble. Why else did he sound so sad, and why did he need so much money every month? Maybe we should drop in on him unexpectedly. The woman consulted with her husband. Why? He was puzzled. Why meddle in the life of a grown-up guy? You'll push him away even more. It's just a separation process, normal for guys. Don't interfere. I'm worried about him. Something's not right. Stop it. Camel's doing great. If there was a problem, we'd know about it by now. So don't panic. He's old and smart. He'll figure it out on his own. Maggie was annoyed by her husband's calmness. It was as if Stephen didn't care about his only child. Out of sight, out of mind, the husband was not interested in anything but his work. Laurel McCullough had already decided that Camel would settle in New York. Why not? He obviously liked the city. His voice was so enthusiastic at first when he first moved there. Back then, his son was still sharing his impressions with his parents. And he's a bright and promising kid. He's the kind of guy who's going to make it in New York. Oh, that's great on the one hand, but on the other hand, they'd almost stop seeing each other altogether. Laurel was upset. Her son hadn't shared his plans with her. One thing that pleased her was that Camel's aloofness and coldness seemed to have gradually disappeared. His voice sounded friendly again. The son even began to take an interest in his parents' affairs, which had not happened for a long time, but he spoke vaguely about his future, soon the diploma. And then I'll come and tell you everything. You'll be in for a surprise. The word surprise was intriguing and alarming. What was he up to, this Camel? But at least Laurel was recognizing her son again, the fun, loving adventurer. Camel had indeed arrived. Not alone, but with his fiancée. Laurel, of course, understood that her adult son had some kind of relationship. But to be so serious. A fiancé right off the bat. Vivian didn't like her future mother-in-law at first sight. A gray mouse, like a girl from the capital, dressed modestly and tastelessly. Thin hair of inexpressive gray color. Slim, even puny. How could she attract Camel's attention? He's always liked brightly colored beauties. This one was nothing to look at. Vivian had beautiful eyes and a nice, open, wide smile, but still. The closer Laurel got to know Vivian, the more she worried. It turned out that the girl came to New York from some village. She went to college, graduated with a specialty, but could not find a job and went to waitress in a bar. That's where she and Camel met. "No, did you hear that?" Laurel whispered indignantly when she and Stephen were alone. They had a big house. Camel's room was on another floor. The young people couldn't hear their parents talking, but Laurel still spoke in whispers. "I like Vivian, though. She's a nice girl. Not like these modern ponytails." "Calm down," Stephen objected. "New York wasn't built from scratch. Think of me. I was a country boy, too, and then I made it on my own." "That's right, all by yourself." Laurel complained. "You went to university, worked your ass off, worked hard. And this one wants to move into a beautiful life on someone else's back." She saw that Camel was from a rich family and she jumped on him like a piranha. "Doesn't he understand? She's nothing to look at. Or did they cast a spell on him?" "You're panicking again on nothing." Stephen cooled his wife. "The main thing is that Camel likes Vivian. You don't have to like her. You don't have to live with her." Laurel had to agree with the last one. Camel did indeed look calm and peaceful next to Vivian. He was holding her hand gently, caring for her and wooing her. Laurel had never seen her son like this before. The girls were falling for him, he didn't have to try. But it turned out that Camel could be gallant and courteous. It's an amazing discovery. He's really changed, matured. There was a new wisdom in his gaze, a kind of independence. It seems that life does change people, makes men out of boys. Camel had already made an important decision. He had told his parents that he and Vivian would soon be married. Maybe he'll change his mind. Where would he marry? Laurel hesitated. Age is not the same, just graduated from university. Now he should think about his career, not about marriage. But even here, she did not find understanding from her husband. "Well, you've got to be kidding," Stephen reminded her. "When did you and I get married? I was still in school, we were even younger." "I am a professional editor with a degree in philology and 20 years of experience. Here's my version of editing a text." Those were different times. "Times are always the same," Stephen said. "Leave the kid alone. He's grown up. He can make his own decisions." Camel and Vivian moved into Laurel McCullough's mother's apartment. The place was empty anyway. The woman didn't mind. "It's better for them to live away from us," she said. "It's too hard for me to play nice in front of Vivian, my son's fiancée." Laurel McCullough was annoyed by everything: the way Vivian spoke, moved, dressed, her unpleasant voice, her unattractive appearance. Well, what else to expect from a village girl shepherdess? Suddenly decided to become a princess. Laurel resented her. Vivian's stories about her family and fate were depressing. And Laurel didn't even have anything to latch on to. The girl had been born into a large family. Her childhood and youth were spent in the village, herded cows, worked in the field, in a word, a peasant with all the consequences. Vivian's intelligence obviously did not shine, but she had a lot of ambition. Otherwise, she would not have gone to New York to conquer the city. She had a mediocre education, some culinary school. She worked as a maid in a hotel, then got a job as a waitress in a bar. Laurel realized the girl's family was in dire straits. Her father had a stroke. The mother worked alone. Of all the children, Vivian was the oldest. Her younger siblings were still in school. So Vivian was the only one who could help her parents in any way. And she did, sending them almost all the money she earned. What a good girl. Stephen marveled when he heard about it. "And I was thinking that Vivian had a good job," Laurel said cynically. "She sends her wages to her family, and Camel keeps her. Good girl. She's gone, and she looks like a Roman girl. A wolf in sheep's clothing." The young settled in New York. They were not going to return to their hometown. Vivian now did not work at all, was engaged in the house, attended some courses. Sort of like a fitness trainer studied, as from childhood she loved physical education. "I'm going to earn money," the girl said. "It is my dream to train people, to make them healthy and beautiful." But Laurel understood everything. Laurel McCullough knew this breed of woman. She'd been there. They create the appearance of vigorous activity, constantly learning something to later supposedly earn. They study psychology or manicure. But in the end, they sit on their rich husbands' necks all their lives. Camel, on the other hand, quickly found a job. With his education, it's no wonder. He was hired by a local oil company as a corporate lawyer. The pay is more than good. He got an apartment. Live and enjoy. That's what young people did. They lived soul to soul. Sometimes they met with friends, occasionally went on vacation and looked quite happy. Laurel was happy that they kept quiet about the wedding. Maybe they will live and disperse, open their eyes, she thought. Camel's age is not small, and I tried to accurately convey to my son the true state of affairs. But Camel didn't like it when his mother said bad things about his fiancée. "Vivian is the best person in the world," he said. "She's done so much for me. You can't imagine. She's the only one who makes me feel happy." Did that lying country girl do a spell? Laurel was angry, but she couldn't help it. Camel still showed his character, his tendency to adventurism, his passion for adventure. The calm, quiet Vivian sort of balanced him out. That was good, except it still wasn't the kind of daughter-in-law Laurel dreamed of seeing. Although maybe it's too early to worry, she reassured herself. About the wedding, the young people are not yet stuttering. Then it turned out that Camel and Vivian had long been husband and wife. They signed quietly, said nothing to anyone, and lived happily ever after. Laurel found out by accident. Vivian finished her courses and got a job at the local sports club. Laurel went to the page of this institution and saw a photo of Vivian, under which their last name was displayed. Laurel called her son and demanded an explanation. "Yes, Vivian and I got married," Camel didn't deny it. "She took my last name. I will try to keep the text as close to the original as possible and follow your instructions." "Why didn't you tell us anything?" Maggie asked. "Why?" smiled Camel. "So as not to worry you for nothing? I can see that you haven't accepted Vivian. So we decided to get married, to make it just for the two of us. We didn't want a big celebration." After that conversation, Maggie McCullough was very upset. How? How could they do such a thing? What would she tell people now? She had dreamed of having fun at her son's wedding. From the moment she first held him in her arms, she had even thought of her own hair and makeup. And the relatives have long been interested in when the solemn event. Everyone was counting on a big celebration. And now it's such a disappointment. It's all Vivian's fault. She's a cunning country girl. She knew the groom's parents were against her. She was afraid of a confrontation, so she did it quietly. They're country folk, and from a family with many children, so they're not lacking in cunning. But Stephen was as calm as ever about his son's decision. "We must respect Camel's choice," he said. "He's an adult." Respect, they covered their indifference with plausible reasons. Stephen is all wise and noble, but in reality he doesn't care about Camel and his fate, as long as everything is going well at work. But there's still hope, Maggie thought. Maybe Camel will come to his senses. Even more likely, as long as it's not too late. Otherwise, that Vivian will have a baby, and that'll be the end of it. Camel will be in bondage for the next 18 years. And then there's Stephen, like a fool, honestly. When Camel and his wife come to visit, he starts talking about grandchildren. "When are you going to make us happy with heirs?" Vivian smiles embarrassedly, as usual, playing modest, and Camel answers frankly. "When the time comes, we'll be happy. For now, Vivian wants to work, to gain experience. Then she can go on maternity leave." But at least the mother-in-law was in agreement with her daughter-in-law. Maggie was happy with Vivian's decision. It's a good thing. The longer they didn't have children, the better. It seemed to Maggie that without children it would be easier for Camel and Vivian to part, if anything. Those things were always harder with children. But there was no question of parting, although Maggie McCullough, for her part, was working hard to get her son's eyes opened as soon as possible. "Does it work honestly?" she asked. "Your wife sends all her wages to her family and lives on your money. That's not the way a family does things. We don't demand anything from you." "Mom, what are you comparing? Are you and Vivian in different situations? They don't have enough money to feed their kids. Vivian's father is still recovering from his stroke. Her mom takes care of him, works, takes care of the kids. What's not to help? Your father and I didn't fall out of the sky. We worked and labored together, and her parents lived in the countryside. They gave birth to children without thinking about the future. Who's to blame now?" "Nobody's fault," Camel answered. "They don't ask for anything. We help ourselves. Mom, I love Vivian and I want her to be happy. How can she be happy if her family is in trouble? So we're helping." "It's the psychology of people," Maggie continued to grumble, "the habit of living at the expense of others. That's all. And children, by the way, adopt their parents' lifestyle. Mind you, children always look like their parents. It's genetic." "And what about me?" Camel smiled. He always diffused the tense atmosphere with jokes. "How did you get to be such an asshole? You're serious, determined. And me? What about you? You're just a very talented, bright, charismatic person. Not a jerk. If you were a slacker, you'd have dropped out of university, not finished your studies, and generally lived like a major on your parents' money. And you've accomplished so much." Dickhead Camel jokingly hung his head. Camel had mentioned more than once that if it hadn't been for Vivian, he didn't know what would have happened to him. But what exactly had happened, Maggie McCullough did not know. Her son didn't want to tell her, and it was useless to pry into his soul. He would immediately close himself off. But Maggie suspected that Vivian simply set up some situation, took advantage of the troubles in Camel's life, and maybe even directed them herself, and then acted as a savior. She would do it. She was a very strong and cunning opponent. Camel shut down talk of his wife at the drop of a hat. He was clearly under her influence. But this can't go on indefinitely, thought Maggie. Camel's intellect has been a great asset since he was a child. One day the hormones will subside and he will realize everything. And I'll be there when he does. I'll support him, help him if necessary. Several years have passed, but nothing in the relationship between son and daughter-in-law has not changed. On the contrary, it seems that they even began to plan a child. At least a colleague told Maggie that she saw Vivian in the Center for Reproductive Health. She has nothing to do there but to prepare for pregnancy. Maybe she's already expecting a baby. I mean, they're secretive. They don't talk about themselves. They live apart, come to visit occasionally. Things were not going the way Maggie McCullough had planned or dreamed. But otherwise, everything was fine. Her husband was still working. "Are you going on a well-deserved vacation, Maggie?" "I've had enough work. You can rest now," they told her. Camel's work was going better than ever. He, like his father, had even started to build his own business. However, he was in no hurry to leave his position. It was still unclear whether the business would work or not. Kostya is such a risk-taker, Maggie thought. Responsibility is not afraid of responsibility. Character. Only he should be an entrepreneur, a real business shark. This guy will definitely achieve a lot. And Maggie was proud of her son and loved him with all her heart. Maggie was proud of her son's success in his career, but she was concerned about his personal life. If we could just get Camel's personal life in order, it would be a thing of beauty, she thought. Vivian worked at a fitness center, earning a pittance and sending it to her family. "That's a good job," Maggie said wryly. Now she's worried about her offspring. I suppose she's determined to get Camel on her side. He still looks at her with affection and adoration. He won't wise up. That night, there was no sign of trouble. Maggie's husband, Stephen, was late for work, which was not uncommon. He was in the middle of a big inspection from Moscow. He literally slept overnight in the office, laying out the couch in his office, and going to sleep there so he wouldn't have to waste time traveling in the morning. How many times Maggie had called him for a well-deserved vacation, begged him to leave. They lived in a big house, had a bank account, and investment deposits that were steadily earning interest. Live and be happy. Maybe you should start traveling? It's great to enjoy the fruits of your own labor all your life. It's time to work hard and honorable to know, but that wasn't Stephen. It was important for him to be involved in all this: reports, estimates, new objects. Maggie understood her husband and felt sorry for him. She was afraid that he might not have a heart attack or a stroke. At an advanced age, such workaholism is not always a good thing. Maggie was home alone. She watched a TV show, read a book, talked to a friend, complained to her about her poor daughter-in-law, and willful young people. I just pressed the hang-up button, but the call came again. An unfamiliar number popped up on the screen. Strangers don't call at this late hour. Hello, came a cheerful, too formal male voice in the receiver. Petrov Konstantin Stepanovich, who do you know? This is my son, Maggie said with cold horror. Her heart was clenched by the icy hand of anxiety for Kamil. What had happened? Had he been in an accident? Had he gotten drunk behind the wheel? Was he coming back from some party? Maggie gasped. It was just like Kamil. Despite his great intelligence and ability, he often behaved carelessly, like a teenager. His son might as well have gotten behind the wheel a little tipsy, even though both parents had taught him safety rules from childhood. But Kamil is Kamil, that's all there is to it. He always had an adventurous spirit and ignored many rules. How is he? Is he alive? Maggie's heart was pounding in her chest so hard it felt like it was about to burst out. Alive. He suffered minor injuries. He's being treated by paramedics right now. But his wife is much more seriously injured, came a voice in the phone. You're her mother-in-law. We need someone to come to the hospital, bring documents, the girl to answer the doctor's questions. We got through to her parents, but they live far away. Sure, Maggie replied immediately, frantically thinking about how to get into Kamil and his wife's apartment. The papers were still in there somewhere. They'd have to find the keys. The main thing was that Kamil was alive and relatively healthy. Vivian was a worry. It looked like she'd been badly hurt. Maggie dreamed of her son divorcing his wife. But that was not the fate she wanted for her daughter-in-law. Finally, Maggie found the keys to her mother's apartment where the young couple lived. She called a cab. It was only then that she realized she hadn't told her husband Stephen about the accident. She decided not to disturb him so late. She would tell him later, when the situation was clearer. The rest of the problems would be dealt with as they came up. It was the first time Maggie had been alone in her son and his wife's apartment. In the past, they'd only come here on holidays, birthdays, New Year's Eve. Her daughter-in-law always set a beautiful table. Maggie had to admit that Kamil's wife was a wonderful hostess. Yes, Vivian was indeed a good hostess. Not a speck of dust in the rooms, everything in its place. Maggie went into the young couple's bedroom and, overcome by a sudden embarrassment, opened the sturdy closet. Still, it was a little awkward being in someone else's apartment. So what could a person need in a hospital? A nightgown, pajamas, towels, Maggie thought frantically, gathering a bag for her daughter-in-law. A folder of Vivian's papers was also found here in the closet. Thoughts were churning in her head, overshadowing each other, making it hard to concentrate. Kamil was the culprit of the accident. He wasn't hurt. But with his wife, I wonder if it's as serious as the policeman said. Maybe he exaggerated? And if on the contrary softened the blow, if Kamil is now seriously injured? Maggie finally packed her things and called a cab. It was late. The cabbie sped down the deserted streets to the hospital. In the lobby, she saw her son at once. He was sitting on a bench, bandaged to the shoulders. Pale but alive. Mom, it's my fault. Kamil hugged her tightly. It's my fault that Vivian is on the operating table right now. Her head is all smashed up. The doctors say there's almost no chance. If anything happens to her, I won't live. I'm telling you that for sure. Well, take it easy, Maggie exhorted her son. It might still be all right. Vivian is healthy. Her body is strong. Besides, you're both to blame. Not just you. Why did she get in the car with you drunk? She's responsible too. What are you saying? Kamil pulled away and looked at his mother with wide-open eyes. It's my fault, just me. There is no forgiveness for me. Only if she survives, or else I will follow her and leave. Just then a uniformed man approached. Kamil, you've been treated. You can go home. Now we have to drive to the police station to give a statement. I'm coming with you, Maggie thought back. She was scared for her son. Yes, physically he was hardly hurt, but his morale left a lot to be desired. And now they were taking him to the station. It was unlikely that the police would spare the feelings of the perpetrator of the accident. "It's unnecessary," replied the policeman firmly. "There's nothing for outsiders to do there." Kemal left, and an anxious Maggie McCullough began to look for a doctor to find out something about her daughter-in-law's condition. No matter how the woman felt about Vivian, she felt genuinely sorry for the girl. And the once unfriendly mother-in-law prayed fervently, asking that Vivian survive. After all, otherwise Kemal, so impulsive and emotional, in the heat of the moment can do something stupid. Vivian's doctor was in surgery at that moment. A whole team was fighting for the girl's life. The orderly, who already knew the situation, took Maggie for a relative of the victim and generously shared the details. Well, this poor girl, drunk behind the wheel, sat down. They say he flew under 200 kilometers per hour and flew straight into the pole. He took himself out from under the impact. His instincts worked. The passenger seat took the brunt of the impact. And the girl's dead. He killed her, you goddamn freak. Maggie felt a twinge of anger at her son, but she must get used to it. Kemal was indeed to blame. Who knows, the nurse continued. There's a 50-50 chance of that. I've worked here for a long time. I've seen it many times. Miracles happen. The hopeless survive and recover. And vice versa also happens. Everything seems to be fine, and a person goes away. Just you wait. The operation will be over. Luke Swan will come out to you. The operation took a long time. Maggie had time to call her husband Stephen and tell him everything. He rushed over. It was calmer waiting together. Anxiety and fear split in half. But Maggie McCullough soon asked her husband to go to the station. Kemal was all alone there, in an unknown state. There was no telling what might happen to him. Her husband nodded and left. Maggie was alone again. At last a tired and angry doctor came out to her. "Are you a relative of Vivian's?" he asked. Maggie scrutinized his face, trying to understand what news this man was bringing. She nodded. "Well, we did the best we could. The girl survived the surgery. Now everything depends on her body. If she survives the 3 days of crisis, she'll live, but it will take a long time to recover. But there are no guarantees. Isn't there anything we can do to improve her chances?" "We have nothing. We've utilized every resource we have, but we're not New York. We don't have the equipment, the drugs. We can get anything, any money, you just say the word. We don't need anything yet. All we need is patience." And the agonizing days of waiting began. Maggie McCullough shuddered at every phone call. What if it's from the hospital? Kemal was under investigation. The outcome of the case depended on Vivian's survival. He could not stay in the apartment. Everything there reminded him of his wife. So he lived under the care of his parents in their house. The young man didn't eat, didn't drink, and didn't even seem to sleep. He was hunched over, pale and gaunt. Kemal was silent, but his mother Laurel saw that her son was tormenting himself, blaming himself for what had happened, cursing, scolding him with the last words. Of course, all this is fair, but it was very painful for Laurel to look at her child in such a state. She could not find words to comfort him. He didn't see or hear anyone at all. The only thing keeping him in this world seemed to be the possibility that he might be of use to Vivian when she came to her senses. She'd need help, rehabilitation, and Maggie was telling her son that he had to be in shape when Vivian woke up. They'd need money and strength to get her back on her feet. But Maggie herself wasn't sure her daughter-in-law would make it. Every day she called the hospital more than once to check on Vivian's condition. There was no good news. The girl was having periodic seizures. Her life was hanging by a thread. Finally, the crisis period passed. Vivian was still alive, but she did not regain consciousness. The girl was in a coma. "But we can't do anything about it," the doctor said. "We don't know how long such a state can last. Maybe the girl will not come out of the coma at all. But we have to do something, right? We keep her alive. We're working with proven schemes. We don't have a lot of resources here in the region. We're a long way from modern medicine. So why don't we move her somewhere else? LA. To get her some help." "We could try. But there's no guarantees, and it's not a cheap endeavor. We're not poor, we'll find the money. I doubt it, the doctor shook his head. The sum is simply cosmic. One transportation of a person in this condition will cost as much as an apartment in the center of our city. Maggie had asked for an estimate, though. Luke Swan nodded his head in agreement. It'll be ready by tonight. You'll be hired. Until evening, Maggie lived in hope. The doctor said there was a chance. She would do anything to make her son happy so that he could move on with his life in peace. Who would have thought a month ago that Maggie would work so hard for her daughter-in-law? On the other hand, it's a shame for the girl. Too bad it's true. But it was because of Camel that Maggie was digging her hoof into the ground. Her heart chilled at the thought that her son might do something to himself. The amount of money Maggie had been told that evening was simply prohibitive. Yes, they were not beggars, but they were not multimillionaires either. And the bill was exactly $1 million, an unaffordable amount for their family. Even if you sell all the property and empty the bank account. Hope flickered in the morning, but faded in the evening. Maggie sank helplessly into her chair, clutching her head with her hands. What was to be done? Camel strode past like a ghost. His cheeks were sunken, his skin a sickly, pale yellow color. Guilt was eating the boy from the inside out. Should I tell him about the money? What was the point? Where would he get it? No, that would give Camel another reason to kill himself. He can't even get the money to pay for his sweetheart's treatment. The next day, Maggie went to the hospital as usual. She was sometimes allowed into the intensive care ward, where Vivian was lying. The woman did not tell her son about these visits. He will definitely want to see his wife. But Vivian was in such a state that the sight would only bring down Camel, who was barely hanging on. The once vibrant girl has become a pale mummy. Her thin arms are tied together with IVs over the blanket. Wires from a multitude of monitors and apparatuses are stretched to her chest, keeping her withered body alive. His head is tightly bandaged. There are bruises under his closed eyes. If Camel saw what he'd done to his wife, he'd feel worse. Maggie spared her son's feelings and asked the staff to keep him away from his wife. Even money had to be given to a few people to be sure. Vivian would occasionally mumble something in her sleep. Maggie listened but couldn't make out anything. But more often than not, the girl lay quiet and still. If it were not for the heaving of her chest, one would have thought that she was no longer in the world. A sharp pity clutched Maggie's heart every time she saw her sister-in-law. The woman now wondered why she had disliked her so much. Friendly, helpful, industrious. And Kamel loves her. She should have made friends with her, found a common language. Poor girl, the daughter of parents with many children, who don't care about their eldest daughter. Vivian's mother came only once. It's understandable, no money, a sick husband, a bunch of kids. Maggie realized that Vivian's mother had no time to sit by her eldest daughter's bedside in the hospital. And there's no point, really. She once saw a program where people who came out of coma, claiming as if being in a helpless state, heard and felt what was happening around them. So her mother-in-law often apologized to Vivian. She also told her how Camel was suffering and how they were all waiting for her recovery. Everything will be different now, Maggie promised. We'll live soul to soul, as a family, supporting each other. Just get well soon. In case you hear something, let you know that everyone is waiting for you very much. Vivian was suddenly worried. Maggie was not surprised it had happened many times before. The girl mumbled something again. Her mother-in-law leaned over to her face to try to make out the words. Maybe it would be possible to understand what kind of dream the girl was having. Anton. Anton Claridge. Anton Claridge? Maggie asked. It was the first time Vivian had ever said something so clearly. Maybe the girl was coming out of her coma. Anton. Would he help? Maggie rushed to fetch the doctors. Little did Vivian speak, perhaps it was a good sign. But Dr. Swan, who approached the patient, shook his head negatively after looking at the readings. No, she's still in a coma. The instruments register a brief return of consciousness. It happens occasionally, but unfortunately it doesn't mean much. The girl is stable, but no improvement is imminent, and it is no longer likely that a miracle will happen. Time is running out, and time in her situation means a lot. Maggie returned home at that time in frustration. Anton Claridge, it was a name the woman remembered well. Vivian had said he would help. Was it a coherent ramble or a request for help? She couldn't forget her sister-in-law's words. No, she would find out who Anton Claridge was by all means. He might actually be able to help the girl. But how to find him, this mysterious man? Who is he, anyway? You could ask Camel, of course, but it's better not to bother him. Camel's therapists have already started working with him. It looks like progress is being made. A careless word could undo the work of the therapists. Maggie would find out for herself. The woman decided to call Vivian's mother. Of course, she was understandably angry at Camel and accordingly at all his relatives. But what to do? If Vivian can be helped in any way, would Maggie take that step? But Vivian's mother knew nothing about Anton Claridge. She sobbed into the receiver as Maggie recounted her daughter's words. The woman even regretted making the call. She tried to spare her son's life, but she didn't even think about the feelings of the victimized girl's unhappy mother. One should be more careful from now on. After pondering, Maggie McCullough decided to use the internet. But there were so many thousands of men of all ages besides Anton Claridge. It was not easy to find the right one among them, and yet Maggie didn't give up. She studied the social pages of these men, hoping to find some connection to Vivian. Help came when she didn't expect it. One day, as usual, she went to the hospital to see her sister-in-law. Now Maggie listened with special care to her occasional words and phrases. There was little chance that she might give some clue again, but in vain. Vivian no longer said anything of the kind and generally more often lay quietly, as if in a deep sleep. That morning in the intensive care ward, Maggie saw a young woman with tearful eyes. "Who are you?" "Exactly," Maggie asked the visitor. "Why did they let you in here? Are you a relative?" "My cousin's sister," she nodded. "And you must be the mother-in-law. I was told that you come here often, worrying about Vivian, helping the staff to take care of her, buying everything she needs. You may be the mother of that bastard, but you don't have any negativity towards me. I think you raised him right. He made his own choices." "Nice to meet you," Maggie said automatically. "Oh, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Lily. I understand your situation, and I'll try to help by following directions. Vivian and I grew up together in the same village. We were very good friends, as we were related. We went to New York to pursue our dreams. Except I was more fortunate. I went to school, got a good job, and she had a life that happened to her." "So you and Vivian talked to each other a lot in New York?" Maggie McCullough asked. "Of course, we were thick as thieves. Then our paths diverged a little when we both got married, but she's still very close to me. I came to visit as soon as I could. When it happened, I was in labor and delivery. That's why I couldn't make it. Now I've finally made it." "I see. You see, Lily, I have a very strange question for you," and Maggie told her cousin Vivian about Anton Claridge. "You know, Vivian sometimes mumbles incoherent things, but she said so clearly Anton Claridge will help. I've been trying to find him, but do you know who he is?" "Of course, how could I not have thought of him? He's a rock star, a very famous man. He sells out stadiums. You've heard his songs, even if you don't like rock. They're on every radio. But what does this pop star have to do with Vivian?" He was head over heels in love with Vivian. Back then, Iman was just gaining popularity, but he was already a wealthy and powerful man. He dedicated songs to her. He was ready to do anything for her then, and maybe now too. But she chose Kamel. "You're Camel?" "I'm sorry, but I didn't like him even then. Careless, infantile. But you can't follow your heart. Vivian fell in love. If I were her, I wouldn't hesitate. Iman is such a talented, kind, generous man." "Wow. Vivian didn't just say his name by accident, did she?" "Of course not. Do you know how to find him?" "I don't. I don't have his phone number or contacts." "I see," Maggie said. "So I'll find him myself, see where he's performing, and go to the concert. Then I'll get to him and tell him what happened to Vivian. Maybe that will help." Indeed, Lily looked at Maggie with admiration. "You're a wonderful person. It's strange that you have such a son. I would go with you. but I have to go to the child." "Thank you, baby. You've been a big help already," Maggie smiled at her. "I'll be fine, don't worry." Now Maggie's goal was to find this Eamon Claridge, to find and talk to him. If Vivian thought he could help, then he could. The woman had a very specific and, most importantly, achievable task before her. Could she do it? Of course she can do it. "It'll be all right," Maggie stroked her sister-in-law's thin palm. "It's going to be okay." Maggie told her family she was going to Los Angeles to visit a friend. In fact, the woman had already bought a ticket to see Eamon Claridge perform. He just participated in the tour and in the next few days will perform in Los Angeles. That's where Maggie would catch him, get through to him, no matter what it took. Stephen, of course, was surprised. "It's strange. It's such a turbulent time. Are you going to a friend's house? What if there's something wrong with Vivian?" "It's a troubled time, isn't it?" "That's why I'm going," Maggie answered. "My nerves are all shot, and I need to reset them. Laurel invites me to his place for a couple of days, says we'll walk along the waterfront, talk to each other. I need that." "And if something happens to Vivian?" Stephen repeated. "Vivian's stable. She's in a deep coma, but her life isn't in danger yet. I talked to the doctor. Keep a better eye on Camel. Remind him from time to time that we need him. But of course Vivian will need his help soon." Stephen nodded. "You're right. You do need a distraction." Maggie has really taken a lot of the heat in this difficult situation. Stephen was working and Camel seemed depressed about what had happened and withdrawn. Maggie needed a breather and a reset of energy. After getting on an airplane to Los Angeles, she checked into a hotel. The meeting with the former classmate she had told her housemates about was just a legend. In reality, Maggie's goal was to get to an Eamon Claridge's concert and try to make her way to him. Walking along the promenade and enjoying the fresh air, Maggie pondered how to get to Eamon. It won't work, then I'll have to look for him in another city and try again, she thought. But the doctors warned that the longer Vivian was in a coma, the less chance she had. Time was working against the girl and all of them. Maggie wanted to ask Eamon to help with the money and getting Vivian to one of the best clinics in New York. They have the resources there to put such heavy patients back on their feet. And in their town, Vivian had virtually no chance. She would slowly fade away in a coma. Maggie couldn't let that happen. How would Camel live with that kind of guilt afterward? While Vivian was in the hospital, Maggie rethought the situation. She recalled various episodes and realized more and more clearly that Vivian was a kind, good girl. There was no better daughter-in-law for her well-to-do son. Now Maggie could not understand her own previous behavior. Why had she been so set against Vivian? Why did she want to see the daughter of wealthy parents by Camel's side? Foolishness, a relic of the past. Now Maggie had only warm feelings for Vivian, affection, tenderness, sympathy. And of course Maggie was very anxious about Vivian's future. No matter what happened, they would certainly not abandon her, just so long as Vivian came to her senses. And that evening there was a concert at the local concert hall. It seems that this Claridge's is really quite popular. There were several doors open at once to let the audience in, and a long line lined up at each one, with McCullough at the tail end of one of them. The crowd varied from young teenagers, almost children, to people of advanced age. So Maggie didn't stand out. Some were laughing, some were singing songs from the Claridge repertoire. Apparently carefree people who came to enjoy the performance of their favorite performer and spend a pleasant evening. Maggie, on the other hand, was here on a mission. The woman, standing in line, looked at numerous posters of Claridge. He was a handsome man, but older, about 10 to 15 years older than Camel and Vivian. Nice looking, and he had good eyes, like he cared. I just wish he'd help me, if only he'd help me. You never know. Maybe Vivian and her cousin really sincerely believe in his unearthly love and sincere feelings. And in fact, he has a carload of people like Vivian. Creative people, they are so in love, emotional, quickly flare up, quickly and cool down. They forget. And McCullough sighed. She had so much hope for this man. They simply had no one else to turn to. The concert itself lasted about 2 hours. Claridge gave it his best. There was a frenzied energy from him that the people in the audience could feel. They were shouting his name, singing along, dancing. Maggie didn't notice how she was infected by the general mood. Strangely, she liked Claridge's songs. She wasn't much of a fan of modern artists, prejudiced against them. And for good reason. Claridge's songs had everything meaning, memorable melodies, striking energy and rhythm. Many of the songs seemed vaguely familiar. Well, of course, Lily had said Claridge sounded from every iron. Surely Maggie had heard him before. During her break, she went to the nearest flower store and bought a bouquet there for a lot of money. Of course, the woman had put a note in it just in case. Ideally, she wanted to be able to tell Claridge herself, but she didn't know how it would work out. In the note, she outlined the situation with Vivian in a nutshell with no details. It simply said that the girl was in trouble and asked Claridge to come to the back door of the concert hall at a certain time. She would be waiting for him there. The second half of the concert was just as energy-filled as the first. The crowd cheered to see their idol. Maggie involuntarily adopted this general mood. Claridge now seemed almost omnipotent. He would surely help Vivian. And now, at last, the moment was right. The last song was played, and people rushed to the stage. Many people carried flowers for the singer. Some just rushed to shake his hand. Claridge was in no hurry to leave. He seemed to want to talk to the audience, too. Several guys from the audience, noticing an elderly woman, made their way to the stage and helped her. Some pushed people, others gently led Maggie behind them. And there she is standing at the stage with her bouquet, and Claridge looks at her and smiles warmly. This is the moment of truth. It couldn't have come at a better time. Vivian's in trouble. Maggie shouted loudly. The Vivian who was a waitress at the bar. Is that where you met her? The smile slowly slipped from Claridge's face, and anxiety appeared in his eyes. The older woman was cheering. He remembered the girl named Vivian. It seemed to really still mean something to him. Maggie was perfectly able to read emotions, and saw that her words made a strong impression on the man. Wait here, Claridge asked. Then he ran up to one of the guys on the stage, dressed in a black shirt and black pants. Apparently it was his assistant. Claridge said something to him. He nodded. Maggie had already been pushed off the stage. From the situation described, Claridge continued to interact with the fans, but his face was no longer as carefree and happy as it had been after hearing Maggie's disturbing news about Vivian. A couple minutes later, Maggie is approached by the same guy from the stage. Hi, Claridge wants you to wait for him in the dressing room. Come with me. The dressing room was a huge room with lots of mirrors and couches. There were bags everywhere, clothes lying around. Maggie cautiously sat down in a chair. Wait here. The attendant smiled politely. Claridge will finish on the stage and come back here. I have to go. Maggie spent about 40 minutes alone. The crowd still wouldn't let go of their idol. And then Claridge came in tired in a soaked t-shirt. Alarmed, he immediately grabbed a bottle of water from the table and emptied it almost in one go. Then he sat down across from Maggie and looked her straight in the eye. Let's get right to the point. What happened to Vivian? That's a really important person to me. And Maggie told. It was hard to confess things to this man, such as her initial attitude toward Vivian, her husband's terrible act. Claridge listened attentively, didn't interrupt, just listened and nodded his head from time to time. Next to this strong man, Maggie, to her own surprise, felt calm. Now that he knew everything, everything would be all right. She'd done the most important thing she'd gotten through to Claridge. He would surely think of something. Beautiful, correct facial features, confident look, charisma, money, talent. Vivian was right to fall in love with such a man. Even her own husband, a young girl, could prefer a man like Claridge. Yes, if Maggie had been younger, she would have fallen in love with him herself. Surprisingly, this fact proved once again that Vivian was indeed very fond of her husband. Maggie did not suspect her of greed. Poor girl, Claridge said when Maggie had finished. Who would have thought she would have such a fate? Your son. I'm sorry, of course, but what he did was extremely irresponsible, to put it mildly. I didn't like him right away. I didn't know what Vivian saw in him, but she loved him with all her heart. Maybe even felt sorry for him. She has a very kind heart. So will you help her? Maggie McCullough asked. She wasn't going to defend her son or change Emine's mind. Her goal was something else entirely. Of course, I don't have that kind of money readily available right now, but I'll do a benefit concert in LA and get some friends to do the same. In 3 days, we'll have the money, and I'll organize the whole thing. Transporting Vivian, getting her into the clinic, finding the best doctors for her. We'll get her out, Emin replied. You are a wonderful man. Tears came to Maggie McCullough's eyes. She cried with relief and joy. Had she really succeeded? Would this powerful and strong man really save Vivian? Do you know our story? Emin suddenly asked. A slight smile touched his lips, which immediately brightened his manly face. In general terms, Maggie McCullough smiled back. But I'd like to know more. I wasn't so famous then, but I was already performing. I was already making money, already had an audience. I used to go to the Rock Bar a lot, and I had a lot of friends there. Before that, I liked the place itself. It was an amazing place. But now, unfortunately, it's not like that anymore. I immediately noticed the pretty waitress with wide open eyes. She was special. She had this amazing energy about her. Vivian always smiled at the customers, no matter how tired she was. The girl could calm a cranky client with one look or word and make him smile. Caring, gentle, alert, and beautiful, of course. I once realized that I purposely began to adjust my visits to the Rock Bar to get into the shift of this waitress. She had a strong effect on me. A man wanted to see her eyes, hear the girl's voice. Sometimes they exchanged jokes, sometimes laughed together, but Emin did not dare to openly express his sympathy. It seemed to him that it might disturb the lightness of their budding relationship. Emin, under the impression of the young, beautiful waitress, even wrote a few songs that quickly became hits. He was attracted to her and inspired by her. But the difference in age, the difference in social status, all this kept Emin from recognizing her. What if Vivian was afraid? If this girl showed her sympathy in any way, a special sympathy, not her usual friendliness, Emin would be the happiest man in the world. He would immediately confess his feelings to Vivian. He would have been able to make her life bright, carefree, pleasant. But no, Vivian clearly didn't see him as a potential mate. And then Emin had a rival, which prompted him to take more decisive steps. It was Kamal, a student. He used to show up at the bar a lot, all unkempt, with a vague look in his eyes. The guy would try to get drunk as soon as possible. Then this senseless body was dragged by a cab by one of his friends. Emin understood perfectly well he does not get drunk just like that almost every day. The young man's life has clearly had some trouble. Nothing. The young will come to his senses, calm down. Who doesn't happen at that age? Or maybe his behavior will get him into trouble. That's just the way it is. But Vivian, beautiful Vivian, for some reason could not remain indifferent to the misfortune of this camel. Emin watched with envy as she sat beside the boy, stroked his shoulders, said something soothing. Kamal at first didn't seem to take Vivian or her support at all. But then he began to smile, to answer her something. Their conversations went on for hours. What they talked about, Emin didn't know. But of course perfectly understood what was going on. Between the young people, clearly budding relationship. And Emin did not like it. He had already realized that he had the strongest feelings for Vivian that he had ever felt. She's special. Emin shook his head, looking at Maggie McCullough. I still think so. There's no one else like her. She just nodded. It was a pity the woman herself realized it too late. Her sister-in-law was truly a miracle. Sincere, warm, kind. Kamal gradually, under Vivian's influence and support, came to his senses. It was no longer a lost, permanently inebriated guy, but a very even handsome young man, witty, funny, lively. He and Vivian started dating, and only then Emin decided to act openly. There was no time to think about it, so he simply asked Vivian to sit down at his table one day. This had already happened, and more than once. The girl often sat down with some of the regulars, then to others to chat, laugh. She liked socializing. I told her all about me. Emin shook his head. Right there. What is interesting, I write songs, including about love. I never complained about my lack of eloquence. But here, I couldn't string two words together, stammering, trying to formulate phrases correctly. And she sat there seriously, looking at me and not saying a word. She let me speak, didn't interrupt me. It was an amazing moment. I wrote a hit song afterwards. I even played it today. People always love it. It touches people, I guess. Vivienne listened to Amine, smiled sadly at him and said what the man knew already. She loves Camel, and Camel loves her. Without her, he will fall again, flying at breakneck speed into the abyss. Turns out Camel had been through an unhappy love affair. Some adult married woman had captured his heart and mind. They met, started dating. Young, handsome guy was a way for this lady to get away from the gray of everyday life. A fleeting diversion. But Camel fell in love for real. His mistress, which is quite natural, left the young admirer when she was bored with their romance, found a new friend, and Camel here sought her. When Camel realized that it was useless, he realized that this woman never had serious feelings for him. He started drinking heavily, almost got kicked out of university, didn't socialize with anyone. Vivienne saved him back then. If it wasn't for her, that Camel wouldn't have stopped. He didn't have a chance. She got him out and him. He practically sent her to the afterlife. Maggie McCullough thought for a moment. Yes, indeed, she had sensed something was happening to her son when he lived alone in Los Angeles. But on the phone, Camel had reported in a casual tone that everything was fine and then immediately dropped the call. And that's what really happened. Personal drama. Vivienne pulled him out, brought him back to life. McCullough should have been praying to her as a mother. Except they didn't tell her anything, the young ones. Camel probably didn't want to. And Vivienne didn't seem to want to make a big deal out of what she'd done. When Maggie McCullough learned the truth, she felt even more for her sister-in-law. Wow, she rejected a man like a chicken. And for Camel's sake, she got the lad out of trouble and left the capital with him. Before Camel, she was lucky. Lucky as it is rare for anyone in the world to be lucky. The woman thought. She understood her son's condition better now. Vivienne had saved him, and he had put her in such danger and put her in a coma. The weight of guilt now weighing on Camel's shoulders must be enormous. It's a warm September day. A couple of elderly couples and a young man and woman are walking along the promenade. Camel gently supports Vivienne by the elbow. She is still very thin, but her eyes look meaningful and eager for life again. They are in Miami. The girl had never walked along this wonderful promenade before and was now enjoying the views. Vivienne had finally gotten strong enough to be allowed to travel, only not far away and without a change of climate. She was bored with the hospital walls she had spent so much time in. Vivienne wanted a change of scenery so much that her family arranged the trip for her. Maggie McCullough had chosen a place not far from their home. The waterfront had delighted her, and Camel on their last visit to this town. Even Stephen, leaving all his business behind, went with them. Emin kept his promise and organized several charity concerts. His musician friends helped him, and many of them did the same. Maggie was very grateful to these people. It always seemed to her that people like them, these celebrities, whom we see only on TV screens, are capricious, selfish. They do not care about other people's misfortune. But it turned out quite differently. It turns out that these are kind and sensitive men and women. The necessary amount was collected in record time. Emin, among other things, took on himself all the cares for the transportation of Vivienne and her placement in the right clinic. It was not easy, because there was always a huge queue for doctors dealing with such cases. People from all over the country sought this center, despite the exorbitant rates. Experimental methods were practiced here. The project was not supported from the budget, at least not yet, but the results were inspiring. Seeing Vivienne in the hospital bed, the sturdy grown man almost cried. He looked at her with such tenderness, stroked her hands so gently. Maggie McCullough's heart was breaking at the sight of this scene. Emin still has some feelings for Vivienne. He has a spouse, 2 children, but something else is clearly left. Maggie and Camel settled near the medical center, where Vivienne was now being treated. Stephen went home. He had to work, but mother and son stayed close by and visited the patient every day. The day Vivienne came to her senses was a day that Maggie McCullough would always remember. On the morrow, nothing heralded such joy. Maggie and Camel were going to the hospital as usual. And then the call came. They were asked to come quickly, for Vivienne had opened her eyes and was trying to speak. The girl immediately recognized them as soon as they burst into the room. Her eyes reflected first relief that her loved ones were near, and then joy. The doctors had made no guarantees, had warned that Vivienne might be different, and had even said that she probably would be. But in front of the astonished Maggie McCullough and Camel was she the very same Vivian. There could be no doubt. Vivian was not going anywhere. Everything would be all right now. Emin had also visited Vivian in the hospital after she woke up. Maggie didn't know what they talked about. It was none of her business. But the woman was open to the possibility that the girl would go to Emin or just leave. After what Camel had done, she had a right to resent him. Vivian almost died because of her husband's carelessness. Well, would Maggie McCullough have accepted such a decision from her daughter-in-law? But Vivian never separated from her husband. She loved Camel no matter what, and held no grudge or anger against him. It was my fault too, Vivian shook her head. I saw him drinking and sat down with him. I didn't talk him out of it. I didn't even try to talk him out of doing something dangerous. Did you want to get home so badly? I figured it'd be okay. I mean, we could have both died. Fools. The recovery was long and difficult. Maggie McCullough, Camel, even the ever-busy Stephen were all there for Vivian, helping her, supporting her. Sometimes we had to force her to do exercises through pain and tears, and then calm her down. But the result was impressive. Vivian first sat up, then stood up, then started walking. And now she is almost the same as before, only very weak and cannot gain weight. But the doctors say she'll get there. They were generally very complimentary of the patient and her support group. Camel has changed a lot because of this situation. He has become more mature, responsible, and serious. He now practically never leaves Vivian's side, warns her every wish, protects her. Youthful adventurism, carelessness, disregard for rules and frameworks, all this is in the past. It was all gone. Maggie McCullough was glad to see it. The accident that could have ruined the lives of so many people was a serious lesson for everyone. Maggie had learned a lot about her sister-in-law, and now saw her through very different eyes. The woman in general has changed a lot, became more attentive and tolerant to people, learned to notice other people's troubles and sorrows, and got involved in old age rock. Now Maggie McCullough was a loyal fan of Emin. His songs, it turned out, were so deep, they had so much meaning. One of Emin's compositions was exactly what was playing in her headphones right now at this moment. Maggie smiled.